not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Everything he does prospers, not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Everything he does prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish.
I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. Remember in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved, a total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect, or are we just insane? John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show. Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes or atheistic Joes to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes and Jewish Jacobs and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.
Good morning. I was really on the fence about what to do with this live stream this morning. And so basically, I had a conversation with Jordan Hall yesterday that, well, it was just sort of a breakthrough for me. I didn't know. I knew I wanted to talk to Jordan Hall about the hurricane because I knew that being in a natural disaster provokes for many people revelation and unearths something real that is covered up. And I had a suspicion that Jordan would have a capacity to see that and understand it and put into words some things that I could sense but never really put into words, and reveal some things. And it didn't disappoint. I will next week is Thanksgiving. My schedule is going to be disrupted, so there won't be sort of the usual flow of videos next week. So I'll probably put that out in its entirety early in the week. By the time you get there, after I've sort of worked through everything, you probably would have had most of it in various forms. But the whole conversation as such was really quite amazing. And so I thought I would start there. But the day before, I had a conversation with John Heers. And my conversation with John Heers too, it didn't have the same effect on me. Talking to John Heers, I just enjoyed talking to John because we both have East Coast sensibilities. We've both done foreign missions. We both like to have a good time. And so talking to John is just a good time. And before that, last week, a couple conversations that are out already. My conversation was with Vesper Stampers was so interesting in terms of trying to get my head around what's going on with this wave of Orthodox conversions. And so talking to Vesper and talking to John Heers, I get much more of a sense of that. And as I said in the John Heers conversation, I used to think that chaos and submission to a hierarchy or a structure and order were sort of mutually incompatible, because most of the time someone sort of step down with submission and authority. It's usually to bring order. But what I see going on in this new wave of orthodoxy in North America, it's pretty chaotic. And so, I poked around. Well, one of the things that was interesting in ARC 2020 an arc in London in 2023. What's it, 2023? Yeah. Was, this desire for Christian civilization. And then I found myself hanging out with really the symbolic world artist crowd and the Orthodox crowd. And that was so much fun to have the juxtaposition between those two things. And Vesper Stamper noted that she's hoping that she gave this talk, basically the good riddance Christendom. That's kind of how she framed it for me, at an evangelical publishing conference. And so she says that should be out on YouTube soon. And I'm really waiting for that, to hear what Vesper has to say there. And then, of course, the Paul Kingsnorth conversation. And then Nate pulled together that group to talk about the Kingsnorth conversation. And it was on a holiday. And generally speaking, holidays are reserved for my family. And so I couldn't commit to it. But I was glad in many ways. I was not that I wouldn't have been loved to have a part of that conversation, but the lineup that he had was absolutely stellar. He had his father Joe from the Anglican Church. He had Cale Zeldin, traditional Catholic as he is, with all of his processing that he's doing about his own church. And I think Cale is such a lovely Roman Catholic in that he's both deeply committed, he's deeply Catholic, and he's deeply honest and struggling about the shortcomings that he sees in his own church. And then Father Chris Green, who's just brilliant. And I always derive so many excellent insights from him. And then, Sherry, of course, big staple in the corner. And I laughed when she said, I've just got something I want to read. And off she goes. And Julian is in some ways such a corner OG. He found me so early and wanted to talk about the monarchical vision. And as that, Nate sort of structured it in an estuary method, and Sherry passed, and Julian just laid down this fasting and feasting, which for me, if you see the couple of videos that I put out yesterday and this morning, this sense of, okay, between Vervaeke and Peterson, especially Vervaeke with his combinatorial explosiveness and his meaning crisis and his understand, and then Peterson with helping me come to a much better understanding of human cognition and how we interact with reality and how we're constantly sifting, selecting, filtering, compressing to create this map of the world. And one of the things that Jordan Hall said to me, which was just this breakthrough moment, was when he said, we always migrate to the most superficial world. And this morning I was listening to that video again, and I was sort of chopping it up, because part of what I'm playing with on my channel, and again, my channel is just a continual sandbox. Part of what I'm playing with on my channel is, okay, so we have these conversations and we have these moments of insight, and we have this algorithm that we're sort of filtering everything through, and we want to somehow share with each other our insights. We are processing that with each other. We are a learning community together. How can we optimize this? And I think, again, Grim Grizz is such a key part of this corner in how, even though, again, he always, seems to take a little offense when I say there are times when his channel is nearly unwatchable. But it's unwatchable because it's unwatchable in a very aporic way, because he is such a wizard. It could be that in the corner, Grim Grizz is Radagast the Brown, with a special module for protection of the sacrality of the womb. That's who Grim Grizz in the corner is, because and if you look at sort of the hash that happens in the Lord of the Ring movies about Radagast, they sort of want to treat with him, and on one hand he's sort of dismissed as silly. Saruman the White has no patience for Radagast, which is, as of course what we find out in terms of Saruman the White's where he goes, that is in Radagast's favor. And of course Gandalf loves Radagast, and Radagast is sort of portrayed as kind of this holy fool, and he's got a sled that's powered by rabbits, and he keeps birds in his hair and has bird dew dripping from his head, but he's got a deep, intuitive handle on the natural, and he's a very powerful wizard in his own right. And I think in many ways that is Grizz. And Chad, of course, with his luchador mask, has in many ways keeps the power of kayfabe going in the corner, and so much of the branding comes from Chad. But the idea of branding, you have to give props to Upcycle in what he's done in this corner. But of course Grizz understands the mind control, and so Chemo is Pete, because his illness has progressed to a certain point, can no longer do what he's been doing at Livingstone. So Chemo, who has only been here about a year, Chemo's sort of stepped in, and he's taken Pete's bulletin position. And so Chemo will be spending a little bit more time around Livingstones. And I was just processing the Jordan Hall conversation, and then I had that mashup video that I released yesterday, and then I was just letting the end play out. And of course, Chad's poem that he mixes with home movies and television, I think, is just revelatory about the moment that we're in now, as is Chad's song. I have to clip Chad's own version of Ontology for Dummies. The Gavin Palmer one with the sock puppets is the one that I played already. But yeah, I let out a tweet yesterday that basically said, we have this bomb cyclone, these names that they have. So basically there's this huge weather system off the West Coast, and it's of course drowning Seattle and everything north of California, but it's pumping snow in the mountains, which is exactly what we want this time of year. And we're having Seattle-like weather for a week around here, which is unusual for Sacramento, but it's needed. And so I'm sitting in my office inundated with not only the things I have to do, but the things I want to do and the things I feel called to do. And I just had this wistful moment of, before I ever made a video about Jordan Peterson, when I would come into my office and the place would be cold and dark. I would be here a lot of evenings because I was homeschooling my kids in the morning, and my wife would come home from work, and I would do my ministry work in the afternoons and evenings, and just many quiet hours in this cold, dark church, and a homeless man sleeping against the door, cursing his own existence. But, no line of people who wanted to talk to me in many ways hungering to have more engagement with exactly the kind of engagement that happened after the Jordan Peterson videos and the meetups and the little corner and the estuaries. And I thought, yeah, you just sit in your office and you'd have the sermon done and you just open a book. And my office was in some ways a hermitage. I could just read and I could write, and those days will come again. Retirement is a change of pace once more. So I don't wish away the blessing that all of you are to me, because, even the trolls, can you imagine Middle Earth without trolls? Now, they get turned to stone when the light of day shines upon them. So if your identity is fundamentally that of a troll, beware the daylight. And it was so interesting. Rod's comment, it's in No Wait, No Ads, and Rod Hare already left a comment on that video, which was deeply moving to me. Let's see. Let me cruise over to here. Content. Paul, I've been following along since your first Jordan Peterson video, and I've appreciated our friendship for 7 years now. And I've often asked you what exactly you're up to. And of course, he asked me that, and I don't know what I'm up to. I never know what I'm up to. I'm a Calvinist, which means that, and my Calvinism, just, again, I know a bunch of you are like, yeah, that's not really Calvinist, but whatever. For me, my Calvinism is just confirmed by so much of what I've learned in that. What does this chattering rider on the elephant really know about what on earth God is doing with the herd and all the riders, and even just through me? I have no idea. So then people ask me, and it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing what comes next. I don't have a big plan. I don't have any of that. I'm making it up as I go along. Now, I've got some big goals in terms of, and some instincts in terms of what I think I can contribute to Christ's kingdom and his church. But so today your project started to come into more focus for me. Props to Jordan Hall for being the conversation partner that catalyzed it. I'm sure the Christians around here have perfect word for whatever it is that I just watched, but you're on the scent for sure. And I don't know what it is that Jordan and I did. And then we got to 2 hours, and Jordan had another. I started recording almost right away because I knew I was ready to talk, and I thought he was ready to talk, because I knew if you've been through a natural disaster, or it could be a domestic disaster, if you've had an apocalyptic event and the veil is pulled over, you're ready to talk. And so we were going for 2 hours, and then his phone rings. He's like, dude, I gotta go. We've been going for 2 hours. Like, all right, go. And he's like, we got to talk again. I thought, I know we got to talk again, because and I don't know, he's such a brilliant guy. A lot of the stuff that I just found insightful, maybe I heard it for the first time. Maybe I was able to hear it for the first time. Maybe it was provoked by the hurricane. I don't know. But part of what we're doing with all of these videos and all of these conversations and all of this transparency and sharing with one another is trying to see behind the curtain and looking for the reality that is almost always covered up by our superficiality. And his comment reminded me so much of the Esther Meek conversation, and the subsidiarity that, when part of what we do with that subsidiarity is we've taken in the real, and we have to sort of, again, learning to ride a bicycle or learning to drive, we have to sort of take this into us at a deep level in order for us to take in new things. And in that way, the phenomenology of revelation almost always has to be progressive, because we can only take in little bits at a time. And so when they're like many of the conversations I've had recently, I go back and I watch them again, even though I have to sit through the cringe of watching myself start sentences and never finish them. All these little bad habits of speech, and all these little things that I fill in the gap, ums and uhs, and all the pauses I have when I'm just trying to search for words in this crazy clunky brain that I have. And the deep instinct. Well, let's get into the video.
Putting that back to other people. So
through any before you were a Christian, but I wanted to sort of listen to your reflections on this, because it isn't just a recalibration of your own internal sense of vulnerability and humanity. It's also an observation on the collective response of Christians and non-Christians to one's world coming undone. Partly because, in my experience, one of the greatest provocations of evil. Now, I will. It's been fascinating watching the election of 2024 and the election of 2016, and how, for so many people, their world is coming undone. And part of why I wanted to talk to Jordan was I knew that when a hurricane comes through, your world gets undone in that the water is shut off. They always tell you in California as we come into the season, get ready for the season and have bottled water and batteries and all of these things. And people hear this and they hear it enough. And it's sort of like church. It's sort of like church in that church is, and this is exactly where this conversation goes with Jordan. Church is sort of like your public service announcements for the apocalypse. And it's the sacraments they're not vaccines for the apocalypse, but they're sort of similar to what old vaccines used to be. They're regularly conditioning us to be skeptical of the superficiality and to prepare ourselves for the coming of the Lord. Because when the Lord, and you see this, it's interesting. So I just started reading We Who Wrestle with God, and I was fascinated by the fact that Jordan starts out not with Abraham, where he usually begins, not with Moses, where the Exodus seminar went, but he starts out with Elijah, who hasn't spoken that much about. And of course, you have this climax of when Elijah flees from Jezebel, and the Lord is not in the wind, and the Lord is not in the earthquake. He's in the still small voice. And then Peterson sort of pivots there into conscience. The day of the Lord, as I say in this, well, let's just play some more. Either conversion or deconversion tends to be that experience of one's world coming undone, not only individually, but collectively. So that's why I wanted to talk to you.
nice. So obviously a lot. Let's see. So I just ever so lightly did have, I was in Southern California during a few different periods where the fires were big, big enough that everybody had to evacuate. So an experience of having to leave. And it was qualitatively different in the very distinct sense that the primary response was just leave. So we just there was no notion or even realistic possibility of any coming together to help, because it's just a fire, right? It's not, community support is not, I don't know, actually, now that I think about it, maybe that is a thing that happens, but it certainly didn't happen in our context. Where in this context, it wasn't until there were flood warnings, and there were very micro evacuation orders, but everybody was surprised by the magnitude of what happened. There was not, I don't think I've talked to a number of different groups that were sort of fire departments or emergency response, and there was no corporate sense that this was going to be anything like this. The rain, trees, maybe flooding, but the magnitude of what happened was substantially higher than anybody expected. And as I'm sure you know, those kinds of things tend to step function.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not. So we went through like two or three step functions outside of the boundary of what people expected, and it took a good solid 3 days for that fact to land. And you just kind of set the scene as somewhere in the morning, maybe about 6 or 7 in the morning, as the destruction starts to really land. Both the flooding, whether we had tornadoes, high wind, rain, landslides, and different kinds of flooding. You have sort of we might call like surge flooding, water levels rising and flooding things, and then we had flash flooding, like strong water just tearing through stuff. So all those different elements combining, you end up with a situation where there's no power, there's no internet or cell phones, so all telecommunications is cut off. A very large number of roads are washed out, some are still gone, and no water. Okay, so that's, so you're suddenly there. And I mean, the experience I think that I've talked to a bunch of people, it seemed to be generally the case, was that for about 60 hours or so, there was a sense of being in the world that we were in, but not as pleasantly. And then an increasingly dawning awareness that no, in fact, we're not in that world anymore. And we're in some other new place, and it's not quite clear what that place is going to be like. And it's interesting because I actually do remember there was how do you call it, like a pivot point, a decision point, where there's a lot of tension. Food, for example, is now beginning to go away. People are running out of food. People are running out of water because there's no water, and any water that you might get from a river was definitely not vaguely drinkable. And no sense of when water might come back, by the way. So you have both the practical reality that water's not there and the deeper concern of, wait, this might be a while, which, as it turns out, it was. We just got water back yesterday, maybe 2 days ago. And because and gas stations were out too, because for whatever the magnitude of the power turned off the pumps for the gas stations couldn't work. And so one of the interesting characteristics of where we lived was that the road to our east is the major highway, and it was washed out maybe about 3 or 4 miles outside of town. And all the major highways were washed out for the first 4, 5, 6 days, something like that. So we were definitely on an island. And therefore, a lot of people who had headed east trying to get to Charlotte got stopped, turned around, and just basically stopped in the intersection at our town. So we had hundreds of people, strangers, importantly, who either their cars were out of gas, or they had nowhere else to go, right? Their houses were flooded or washed out, or whatever, camping, right? So by day 2, I ride my bike around town to find out what's going on. And I noticed, oh, wait, there's a lot of people here and nobody knows what's happening. I talked to a bunch of truckers. I talked to a bunch of people. There was one gas station convenience store that was open for about 40 minutes before it just got completely washed out.
So I love how he just kind of walks through this thing. And you have, again, later I'll talk about the fact that the day of the Lord comes to us as individuals when the doctor says that you or a loved one has cancer, or a loved one was just been injured or killed in a car accident, or you just lost your job, or you find out that your spouse has been cheating on you and has been carrying on a romantic affair, or you find that someone that you love has been leading a secret life and been lying to you the whole time, or that a war has just broken out and everything around you is going to be changed. And so what's interesting is that there is a process that we go through individually. But again, now remember, we all scale up into these extended bodies, into these subtle bodies. And there are processes that the subtle bodies go through too. And again, as I think about this and I continue to ponder this conversation and what I learned from it, I note again that every time I participated in this conversation, I have listened to this section that I'm playing right now a second time. And now the third time, I am continuing to hear more and notice more that I didn't hear the first 2 times. What is that teach me? It teaches me that what we are learning through cognitive science is true, that we are constantly filtering, and we can only pay selective attention, even in as small a pipeline as a conversation with that I have participated in. I miss a ton of stuff. I'm running a filter, and it's a salience filter. It's a value hierarchy. And these, again, this was the point that Jordan Peterson kept trying to make to Sam Harris at Vancouver One, that in one of the ways to understand most of that conversation is Jordan is bit by bit, logically, rationally using accepted science, using accepted history, using all of the books that everyone is supposed to know in Western civilization, trying to explain to Sam Harris, who has a PhD in some kind of cognitive science. He's trying to say, look, Sam, we don't just listen to a conversation in the way that Zoom recorded this. You cannot stop, take a little break, have a little distraction, come back, at least the vast majority of you can't, and relay verbatim everything that I've just said for the last 10 minutes. That's not how memory works. You'll have a gist of it, but that gist of it will be part you and part what I said. And that is the shape of our constant interaction with the world. And part of the reason why we construct worlds and we prioritize the superficial was exactly what Polanyi and Esther Meek have pointed to, in that we have to do this. We cannot devote as much energy in driving as I did when I was a 17-year-old in New Jersey, first behind the wheel. I cannot do it as when I was a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old on a bicycle, or learning to swim for the first time, or learning to read and sound out letters. This is a process by which we take in revelation. Now, some of this revelation is general, it's common, some of the revelation is special. And I would argue that God number one and God number two, which I've always said are related to general revelation and special revelation. General revelation is common. It sort of relates to what everyone calls objective. Special revelation is personal. It's number two. And it's personal, it's individual, it's got a person behind it, and it's the meeting of persons. And this is sort of mode one and mode two, spirit of geometry, spirit of finesse. And we have to use the spirit of finesse when we're dealing with God number two and when we're dealing with the personal. And so when you listen to Jordan Hall talk about, give the narrative. Now, again, this is a very selective history that he is giving us, because the almost all of the information that he took in those first 2 days have been summarized, filtered, digested. And what he does is delivers to us salient moments, because he's a skilled communicator and used to communicating with human beings, salient moments that are evocative of connecting to memories and experiences we have. So we not only have a sense of, he walked outside and he saw people who were stranded and water and wind damage, and he not only talks about that, but he talks about it in a way that can connect to us this imagistic universe that Jordan Peterson has been talking about in his last videos. And I expect to find it in We Who Wrestle with God, or maybe that's this stuff will be for the next book. This, Peterson talks about the collective subconscious, Jung's idea. Peugeot, of course, has a symbolic world, but these stock relationships of images that Peterson says that large language models are starting to deal statistically with and show the relationships with. But again, Peugeot keeps saying, yeah, but you have to understand that these are LLMs are learning from us. They're, in a sense, our scribes. But when the superficiality is disrupted, revelation begins. And, well, once we begin to see the strangeness of the world, there's no end to what we'll see. Now, I just started Peugeot and Rod Dreer's conversation this morning. And when I think about Dreer's book, I've started reading it. I'm a ways through it. It's a faster read than Peterson's. Peterson said 12 rules for life was sort of the easy thing. Maps of meaning, this is halfway between. And it's like, yeah, it's halfway between Maps of Meaning. And the dynamics that Maps of Meaning have that make it such a tortured book, there's some of that in We Who Wrestle with God. Anyway, let's continue.
Cash only, of course. And there's like, that might get dodgy, right? Things might not be so awesome in a little while. And then I start hearing some rumors, right? This is another thing, by the way, how communications drops to the oral very quickly. And of course, in the oral, we have to deal with rumors because people only know what they've heard, but you still need to get information. So rumors about similar situations in Swannanoa, which is, everybody tells me, much worse situation. Like Swannanoa got substantially more heavily hit than Black Mountain. Black Mountain got hit, Swannanoa got devastated. And so the same thing, like the big grocery store there, people are gathering, it's getting a little bit.
Now, it's also the case that when I watched the Peterson, Greg Laurie conversation, these two couldn't find each other. You know when they found each other? When Greg Laurie starts talking about the calamity that was his mother's social patterns. When Greg Laurie starts talking about the neglect that he suffered as a child and what that did to him and how that set him up for being able to hear the very strange message of Lonnie Frisbee, another tortured Christian who, and that then set him on a path to Chuck Smith and Calvary Chapel, and then the life that he's led. But Jordan Peterson and Greg Laurie are living in two different worlds. And part of if we're going to be honest about the blessings of postmodernity, and it's interesting watching Peterson get more and more honest about the blessings of postmodernity. And if you watch the comment section, you'll notice that Damian Walter left a comment recently where he said, I'm not convinced Peterson is actually postmodern. I think he's fundamentally postmodern in denial. And there's a lot that you could say about that. But Damian watches this corner very closely, as many of us watch him very closely. I love his video work. I really do. And I gain so much by listening to Damian because I was shielded from postmodernity by the shaping of my education. I didn't have any postmodern education at all. And some of you will say, wow, you were blessed. And I was. But where was I going with this? Oh, okay. So if we're going to be fair to the postmoderns, let's also be fair to the moderns. When you look at the aporic, apocalyptic, revelatory quality of a natural disaster, it's at the physical level. It's the physicality of the wind. It's the physicality of the rain. It's the physicality of the destruction. Now, that's a little different from Greg Laurie's apocalyptic prompts through the destructive, chaotic relationships of his mother in combination with the divorce laws of the day. But we are deeply tied to the physical level. We are the marriage of the breath of God and the stuff of earth.
So, in fact, by the way, but as you get to the end of day 3, the guns come out. We start seeing the open carry laws are being highly used, like a large fraction of people walking around with guns. And, I had my gun out, like in the house when I went to sleep. The gun was loaded and ready to go. Many of my neighbors did too. So that was like a sense, like, okay, we don't quite know what's going to happen, but if it goes, it might go this way. as an edit with enough to make choices, like actions on that basis. And as it turns out, so Friday, Saturday, we're now Sunday, right? So day 3, Sunday. And so we have the opportunity to go to church. And as it turns out, the road was just quite cleared enough that we could get there from where we live. And I'm not sure what fraction of our church was able to make it. Still, many, many people were stuck in their houses, but a meaningful amount. And we were certainly committed to worship. And maybe as it turns out,
And what's so interesting about, because I've been to church, and this scales. So it happens in minor ways with snowstorms in places that get snow. And you have a Sunday. I mean, it's so interesting. I never heard about churches, people canceling church until much more recently. In many places, you kind of knew if you had a snowstorm that a lot of people weren't getting to church, but you didn't cancel it because the preacher lives next door and he'll come, and you might have 4 or 5 people there, but you're still going to do it. So these days, we cancel church. And of course, COVID was a national experiment in that. So, but I think part of the reason churches are so reticent to cancel is when you hold church right after a hurricane or a snowstorm or something like this, it's really a special service because you look around and there's sort of a gleam in everybody's eye that, hey, we made it. Now, because we've suffered this thing together, things will be different now.
One of the members of the congregation had been doing crisis response as missionary work for decades. And so he says, hey, this is what's going to happen, and this is what we're going to do. And so, like 180-degree pivot. There was no more any question of how do we kind of like fall back in response to what's happening to us. It's how do we step forward into how we're going to respond to what's happening. And then it was a decisive change. Like we exited the old world. Now we're entering a new world.
And again, there's this, just like in church, there's a sense that sacramentally, and we're going to get this in this conversation, every time you baptize a baby, again, those of you who have listened to my rough draft for Sunday have heard me say this quite a bit. Baptism is a ceremonialized ordeal by water. It is trial by water. It is sort of mocked in Monty Python and the witch trials, but it is death to life. You can read that clearly in Romans 6. And the same for Israel passing through the Red Sea and Israel passing through Jordan. Those are water ordeals. And the whole idea behind, and in the book of Daniel, you have the fiery furnace. That's a fire ordeal. The whole idea of an ordeal is, who is in this, an ordeal is in some ways the perfect mix of God number 1 and God number 2. Because in the revelation of the whole earth is full of his glory and the stability of the character of God as seen in the stability of the character of the physical world, when a body goes into the fire, it should be burned to a crisp. And so in Daniel, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are put in the fire, they are in a sense going to be whole burnt offerings to the gods of Babylon. But by God preserving and sending his angel to be with them in the furnace, he says, you can't touch them. It's a trial by fire, and that which endures the trial is shown to be, there's so many different ways of saying it, and all the ways are insufficient, are shown to be friends of God, are shown to be sons of God. And so that's why baptism, and there's these pictures from the East of Orthodox baptism where they take a baby and they push the baby underneath and dunk the baby. And it's in some ways better than sprinkling because of course, when you put that baby under the water, everybody gasps because it's a baby. But don't forget, babies have been living underwater the first 9 months of their life before they're born. So there's so much in there. And then, of course, the other sacrament, I'm Protestant, adjust as you will. The other sacrament, of course, is the blood of Christ and the body of Christ, the blood shed and the body broken for us. The cross itself is an ordeal, and the resurrection is the coming up out of the water. It's the leaving the fiery furnace without tinge of without singed hair or smell of smoke. But it's more so because it's the resurrected body of Christ, which now comes into its fullness in anticipation of the bodies that those of us who are raised by God in Christ will have. It's a sacrament of the new heavens and the new earth that are coming. So, hey, get me preaching.
We're still interested in, is the power going to be off? Is the water going to be on? Like, what's happening? How do you communicate? What's going on? Starlink starts showing up, things like that. But now it's a very different sensibility because there is an actual corporate response by our church. And of course, interestingly enough, given the fact, obviously it was Sunday, many other churches also spontaneously respond the same way. I mean, on the order of probably 20 or 30 within the 10-minute circle around my house, maybe more, and begin to go. And at exactly the same time, people from outside start to show up. Oftentimes, no particular planning. There's a personality type who just, something happened and they just felt they needed to help. And so they just rented a U-Haul truck.
And again, I love this part where not only the point I was making before I got monologuing on sacraments, the missionary work that the church does all over the world. And later on, I'll draw the connection between why don't we see miracles in North America like we see miracles overseas? Well, actually, I think I got more insight into that question from this conversation. Something I've wondered about a lot of my life. We got more insight from this conversation on that question than just about anything else. But you've got Jordan Hall talked about the fact that there's all these former missionaries in his church. And it's like, oh, these are really handy people to have around when the hurricane comes. Because in many ways, the way I lived in the Dominican Republic, I had to be far more independent from things like the power grid, which went off regularly, and public water, which was only on intermittently. And so basically what you do as a foreign missionary who's expected to somehow live in both worlds and connect the two worlds is you have things like a cistern where I have stored water and I have a generator that I run and I've got battery backups on things and on we go. Yes. It's kind of like, when someone is like, miracles don't happen, it's kind of like someone saying, I don't believe human beings can travel any faster than 6 miles an hour, maybe 15 or 20 on a fast horse. And it's like, you've never seen a train. You've never seen a car. You've never seen a plane. You are sort of the inverse of the islanders in the Pacific when the American and Japanese aircraft would fly over and they look up and they tell a story to try to, well, those are giant birds leaving white trails behind them. That's what people who are like, miracles don't happen. That's exactly what they're like. They're basically a cargo cult. They're basically a cargo cult. Modernity in many ways is a cargo cult.
Stopped off at Walmart and started driving. And 12 hours later, making their way through roads that are out, they show up, and for some reason they show up at our church. And so, okay, great. What do you got? Unload, go. And so, a solid 2.5, almost 3-week sprint of craziness, all kinds of craziness going on. It was profound, very beautiful, and also very tragic, because these things naturally go together. And it was a different kind of world. And it was interesting for me to observe what it took for us to move into this new kind of world, given the characteristics, and how things changed, by the way, when, for example, for whatever reason, Verizon turns back on, and people with Verizon phones suddenly have some meaningful access to the internet, but everybody else's phones are off. and what that does, it was, everything was interesting. The first time that we finally were able to drive an hour, because we'd heard that gas was available out more in that direction, and began to see more. Like, oh my gosh, we don't actually just live in this 10-minute circle. We live in this much larger place. Oh wow, and that place is destroyed, and that grocery store is just open and just working. What's happening here? So, I mean, there's a lot, but that's just maybe a brush of the scene.
Well, to me, I mean, the word apocalyptic, which of course is this deeply important word throughout the Bible. The day of the Lord in the Old Testament is apocalyptic. Apocalyptic is Noah's flood. It's the plagues, wonders upon Egypt. It's the Dead Sea crossing. It's the Jordan crossing. It's the coming of smoke and fire to the tabernacle and the temple. It's the Babylonian destruction of the temple. It's the destruction of the Babylonian Empire by the Medes and the Persians. It's the Christmas story. Advent is all about apocalypse. It's the crucifixion. It's the resurrection. It's the day that the Apostle Paul is looking at. It's the day when the police show up at your door when your husband is late and you go into shock even before they say. I want to talk a little bit about this because I continue to wrestle with this, and so I appreciate the feedback, because sometimes I wonder, should I not clip the video until after I release it, or should I clip the video before I release it? I have a love-hate relationships with clipping, but I know, especially with channels, let's say like Nathan Jacobs' new channel, I really appreciate his clipping, because it's the case that I often only have 15 or 20 minutes to listen to something, and I'll go to YouTube and Nathan Jacobs will drop a new video and it's 2+ hours long. And so part of me doesn't listen to it and never gets around to it because it's 2 hours long. And then lately he started making clips. So then it's like, oh, so then it's like, okay, well, maybe I should clip after, because then someone will see the clip and then they'll go back and they'll listen to the whole video. Although often I'll hear the clip and then it'll be like, and I never get back to the whole video. But here's the thing. What happens, because of the way my channel works, and because of the way I structure my time, I have this conversation with Jordan Hall in the morning. And then after that, it's Thursday, so it's sermon day, and Chemo's around, and Nina's around, and Imelda's around, and we're readjusting sort of the backstage of worship because of Pete's withdrawal. And so the idea, so I have this conversation with Jordan. I just release it right after it happens. No, there's reasons I don't do that. Number one is because I don't know what a conversation is until after I've slept on it. Number two, I watch the algorithm and I watch viewership, and I often don't know how, because I don't know what a conversation is, I don't know how to title it or thumbnail it. And titling and thumbnailing are not unimportant parts of YouTube. So especially with a conversation like this that I want to sit on, I'm going to sit on it. But for me, and this is part of the channel, I have to process it in order to know what this conversation is about. And so what will happen inevitably is I'll do a conversation with Jordan, and then I'll be busy with all of my stuff. And late afternoon, it'll be like, I've been thinking about my sermon. I've been learning, interacting with the people. I've been doing all this, and I have a few thoughts, and I've got all of this other stuff going on out there in the world. And so then I'll make a video at the end of the day, and I'll say something like, oh, by the way, I talked to Jordan Hall and had an amazing conversation. And then I get a half a dozen messages on Twitter and email, and Can I see the conversation with Jordan? And then suddenly I have to deal with 6 to 12 people who want special access, which is totally fine. I'm glad they wrote me. I'm glad I'm still at a point where at least half of the messages that people try to send me, depending on how they try to send them to me, get through and I can read them. And I have a sense of who I'm talking to. That's really what I want. And if the channel was much bigger, the bigger the channel gets, the more I can't do that. So, but then if I have to spend an hour or two sort of dealing with all of these conversations, plus because it's not just a matter of just responding to one person, then suddenly when someone comes up in my screen, I'm thinking about them as a person and I've got a question. And so it becomes this enormous ADHD side rail that I can't manage. And then there's the fact that we've got feeder channels in the corner like Grizz and like Chad, who are regularly riffing off other stuff that's going on in the corner. And I think it's nice for them to have a little bit of early access, so they sort of know where things are coming, so that the corner has a sense of a subtle body. And so my answer to all of this was, I'm going to have a special section in the membership called No Wait, No Ads. Generally speaking, if I remember correctly, it's not monetized. And so if you don't want to give YouTube a certain amount of money each month and not have to deal with ads, which I do, and you want to see videos right after I record them, there, it's yours. And that's $7 a month. And if you don't want to pay $7 a month, you're going to see exactly the same content. You're just going to see it probably 3 to 7 days later. And so that's why I did that. But I still wrestle with it because, again, I have this church culture where I don't want money to be an impediment. And I know that for some people, $7 a month is a problem. I mean, and Substack has accentuated this because I'm paying for all these Substacks now, and I'm happy to pay because the people whose Substacks I pay for, I do because I want to support them. And so I also support people on Patreon. I support people buy me a coffee. I have memberships to certain channels. I participate in this because, I've learned from many of you that this is an important part of the economy here. And if I really value someone's support, especially the people who are doing it for their day job, so then I should put my money where my mouth is and not only use them stuff on the channel, but also be a patron or be a paid Substack or have a YouTube membership or something. So I do that. So for me, the best compromise was no wait, no ads. And what often happens with that is I'll post clips to something like this because for the cognitive science reasons that I just talked about, clips are really helpful. They really have their place. And even my brother-in-law said to me, he said, I like it when you make clips because you have all these long conversations and these are with random people. And I don't know if there's anything good in there. And so I've only got a limited amount of time each day that I'm going to listen to this kind of stuff. And so there's a value hierarchy and there's a priority, and I don't know where the good stuff is. So when you make a clip about what is salient, then I know to watch the whole thing. So that's where I'm at right now. And I know this is a comment I get regularly. People are frustrated because I'm playing clips. The truth is, by the time I release the entire conversation out to the open channel, you will have probably heard the whole thing. But there's still value in listening to the whole thing because, number one, the repetition of listening to something that's valuable, you derive even more value from it. And number two, there are elements. So for a while I was, sort of like Basecamp does. I was talking to them about how they manage their channel because I was interested in some of the decisions that they've made. And then they use this bit of software where you could sort of use words to edit. And what's really nice about that is, just for my own vanity, I can take out all of the really bad habits of speech that I have. And now lots of people have bad habits of speech, and we know them. Curtis Yarvin is one of the worst. He's seriously hard to listen to because of his bad habits of speech. And it can take some discipline, and with some discipline, you can get rid of your bad habits. And that's a valuable thing to do. And I'm especially sensitive to this because I speak for a living, and those bad habits are also in my sermons. Now, there's some interesting science being done now that suggests that actually the bad habits are important because they incentivize listeners, and they give the speech a quality that it doesn't have if it's full of ams and ums and you knows and like and all of these other bad habits. So there's another one. And then the pause. So I was playing around with the Basecamp thing, and then a bunch of you were like, "Oh, don't do this," because it's machine-like. And I understand that too. So part of the reason I do keep, for the most part, the raw recordings on my channel with no front end, maybe YouTube will dot in a commercial or something, but is I want a record of as much of the flow as possible. And then there's sometimes reasons somebody says something. This is another reason I wait a few days before I release it to the open channel, because it's not an uncommon thing. It's not an uncommon thing to do a conversation like this and have somebody come back to me and say, "I said such and such, and I really shouldn't have for one reason or another. Can you take that out?" So it's been out to no ads, but not too many people have seen it or heard it. And probably most people who saw it and heard it won't even remember the thing that was taken out. So then I go in and I take the thing out before I put it out on the main channel. So it also gives me a chance to do some editing. So that's all sort of my thinking about YouTube. Now, this week I had my first takedown from YouTube for content. And it was a video that I published in 2020. And the title of the video was Traditional Religions Outcompete Ersatz Varieties of Meaning Making. And it was done by the machine, and it said I had the right to appeal, so I appealed it, and then my appeal was rejected. If you're curious about the video, you can go to Odyssey, which is most of my channel is mirrored in Odyssey. And so if YouTube takes something down, those things are up. And I know a lot of YouTubers don't keep backups of all of their videos. I do, because I'm anxious about apocalypse. And it was so interesting that they took this video down. And the reason they took it down, I was reading this paper, this publication from Clay Rutledge about certain aspects of what people, when they leave mainstream religions, go into. And so the reason was that what I was saying was sort of incentivizing conspiracy thinking. And then I was just starting to watch Peugeot and Rod Dreer's conversation, and I thought, I wonder if YouTube's going to take this one down. I wonder, and suddenly I had a lot more sympathy for Jordan Peterson's decision to do Daily Wire, because I wonder to what degree YouTube is going to try to prop up a world without miracles. So, yeah, I'm always playing around with this stuff and trying to figure out, could we just move to Odyssey? I've thought, there's Rumble, there's Odyssey, there's all of this, but the one thing that YouTube has that no one else has is discoverability. And most of these and not only discoverability, but great apps for iPhone and Android and tools tool-wise, YouTube is far and above every other platform. And so my thinking is we continue to use it while it's open to us. But always keep in mind, this thing could end. And so, and if it ends, it will be a serious rerouting. And for people who have been deplatformed, it's a serious rerouting, but yeah. All right. Sorry. Let's keep going. Say, are you so-and-so? I've got bad news for you. It's the day when the doctor sits down and says, these symptoms that you're experiencing are part of a pattern, and I suspect, and then you don't hear anymore. But when so the day of the Lord comes, it fractals. It's global. It's, when in my conversation with Peugeot and Vervaeke, when we were talking about the sacred, I thought Jonathan nicely located the day of the Lord in Auschwitz and the day of the Lord at Hiroshima, and this looming day of the Lord in the way that the revelation of the atomic bomb to the world changed human psychology and human culture immediately. 2016, the election of Donald Trump was the day of the Lord. COVID was the day of the Lord. And, to me, when I listen to you talk, it's the revelation of deep code. It's when the guns come out, revelation has happened. And when you go to, and when this is the week that this is the week when you get to church and you look around, you know that some couldn't make it, but you look around and we are it. We are the church. And there is deep code within us that we didn't even know was there, and it started operating. And all of these things begin to happen. And so, that's exactly why, one of the things that I've seen from you is a capacity to speak of deep code, because the truth is most of our code is unrecognizable to us and non-discernible until something happens and the world around, we begin to understand that we live in multiple worlds simultaneously. And what happens in apocalyptic is that one world is peeled away and another world emerges, and whatever world you inhabit from that point on is not the same as the world you thought you were living in before. So what did you see in yourself in terms of your deep code, and what did you see in the church?
Okay, so for example, I woke up in the middle of the night, and the names of people who I cared about that I didn't know how they were doing were running through my head.
Yeah.
And so I started writing them down and endeavoring to find out, and noticing, by the way, that some of them were people who were far enough away that, absent a change in the state, the circumstances we were in, I wasn't going to be able to find out. But there was a couple of layers. One layer was, okay, I need to know that my people are well. That's one thing that was very clear. Actually quite significant. I might get on my bike. I actually went walking around town, somewhat, let's say, stupidly, because this could have been fatal. But I was walking around during the middle, like as the hurricane was at its peak. Right, so we're talking 5, 6, 7 in the morning. As soon as light comes up, I just start walking, and I actually end up walking a square where the boundaries of the square, where 3 sides are where to come turn. Oh, we back?
We're back.
Go to what I was thinking was going to be the highway, but it turns out the highway is now completely flooded. Turn, walk to, there's another major flood. Okay, we're actually in this very small square. For the period of the hurricane, we're actually in a square that I could walk the entire space of it, and that was the world. Well, why was I doing that? I had a sense of a need and a responsibility of understanding what was going on, and then actually reporting that back to other people so we could begin, right? So a sense of, in myself, let's say, a native sense of feeling of responsibility for the well-being of whatever this larger group of people, not just my family, but the community that I was in. And then I wake up, okay, what about all the people in my church? Where are they? How are they doing? How do we begin to help them? Like, actually, what are the actions that we can take? And moving into that. And of course, the beauty of it was that I wasn't alone in that many of the other people in the church had exactly the same sense. And I was able to cross off names. Okay, we know they're okay. We know they're not, we know they're not okay, but we know where they are and how to help them. We don't know anything about them, circle, and we can't do anything about that. Okay, let's check in, things like that. In the context of the church, I would say then there's two tones, like two major tones. One tone is the people who I know or live near. So these are members of the church who are also part of my community. Let's just make that distinction. And I guess I always knew it because that's one of the reasons why I was attracted to it. But it was beautiful to watch it happen, which was a profound, immediate orientation towards sacrificial love, let's say. And it was real. Like, people put significant their lives on pause, their jobs on pause.
And again, if you haven't heard through distributed amongst how many podcasts and YouTubes why Jordan settled where he did and got baptized and got married and committed himself to the church, he and his wife had a deep sense of the wholesome. And the wholesome, you think back again, Peterson's latest is, sacrifice is the foundation of the community. Now that's pushed around a good bit on the Grail Country conversation about Kingsnorth, which is definitely a must watch. But now suddenly when the apocalypse rises, you want to be in the community that is all about self-sacrifice, because these are exactly the people you want when it all comes down.
In many cases, their families on pause and began to work and putting a lot of effort into work. And by the way, in some cases, had meaningful risk, physical and certainly emotional. We had a lot of bad experiences that people had, and they just lived with it and dealt with it, and that also sense of helping. And that was real and incredibly beautiful, and also maybe at a slightly less profound tone, but very interesting, was also the orientation towards vocation, meaning we're in chaos. We don't have any particular rules, regulations, how things operate. So everybody start picking things up. Oh, you are really, really good at operating a chainsaw. Then I should probably just give you this chainsaw. You do the chainsaw work. I'll do the next thing, right? You just keep, and it's whatever's in front of you and whatever you're good at. You just keep working on it until eventually something starts to happen and it lands. The beauty. Okay, so the third tone. The church doesn't all live in Black Mountain. And boy, did they show up. I mean, we had the helicopter guys. Suddenly people in helicopters are flying and landing in fields, that I can walk to. And who the heck are these people? And they come up and they're from a church in fill in the blank. And they're here. And there's an immediate, yep, like we're clearly we're on a team and there's a nature that there's something about that team. And one of the primary rules of that team is that you help people. Okay. At whatever risk to yourself. And these guys put in some serious risk. Like, they were flying helicopters in places they didn't know, to places they didn't know, for 16, 12, hours a day. It was just, in some sense, brutal, and also exactly why God put them on earth.
Yep. Yep.
You got the guys coming up from, who do we have? I mean, we had Texas, we had Indiana, we had Tennessee, we had South Carolina, we had Georgia, and sometimes they'd come up as one or two, sometimes they'd come up as a group. And of course, I have a little bit of a selection bias because I'm at a church, right? So most of the people who came to our church were churchly people, but still the potency here is significant. Louisiana showed up in force, and we had a crew of 4 who drove up from Monroe, Louisiana, and with a food truck, and they just set up next to our church. We spun up some generators, and they cooked meals for the entire community for like 10 days. And then when they left, they let somebody else take their truck and cook meals for another 5 days. I mean, it's just exactly right. And all of it was very much how do you say it right? A joyful ability to actually
and well, right before I get to what he's about to say here, Louisiana, when he said that, I thought, yes, because you know what? Louisiana is always getting hit with hurricanes. They know. And so it's like, yeah, they live this apocalypse, and they're after it.
Realize the story that everyone ultimately desires to set up in force. And we had a crew of 4 who drove up from Monroe, Louisiana, and with a food truck, and they just set up next to our church. We spun up some generators, and they cooked meals for the entire community for like 10 days. And then when they left, they let somebody else take their truck and cook meals for another 5 days. I mean, just exactly right. And all of it was very much how do you say it right? A joyful ability to actually realize the story that everyone ultimately desires to be in. Yeah.
Listen to that. The story that everyone ultimately desires to be in. There are, again, in times like this, I remember Rod said something to me about, men and heroism. And it's true. And this is what, of course, what Jordan Peterson's hero's journey, we have built into us a desire to rescue, a desire to save, a desire to be heroes. And these small apocalypse, they call that out from us. And Tolkien really gets at this with hobbits and in the Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Okay, so then you said something that I thought I was thinking about this because you used the word deep cut, and I'm not sure it's always the case, but I would say oftentimes it is the case that there's actually, we're appealing, so let's make it a sphere. We actually tend to migrate, for whatever reason, by the way, to the most superficial world. You think about like just when you're driving.
Yep.
The more you drive a route, the more you're not in the moment of the driving, but increasingly you're just like listening to music or thinking about whatever's going on. And then a car pulls out like in front of you, and all of that collapses, and then you're in the reality of the fact that you're driving a 4,000-pound vehicle, 70 miles an hour. Like the reality of the heaviness of, oh wow, same thing. So the more superficial world evaporates by necessity, because the more fundamental is in fact just more fundamental, and you begin to occupy the more fundamental world, and then you start stitching together the pieces that need to be brought together so that it is whole. I mean, as an example for us, it was by day 4, it was sort of tacitly and maybe I guess formally agreed to that whoever had a pool in their backyard, the pool is now a commons for flush water, because you couldn't drink the pool water, but you needed to flush your toilet. And
Yep.
The only way to flush your toilet is you got to carry a big bucket out to the pool. And so now you've got these flotillas of people. By the way, mostly old ladies in my neighborhood, usually pulling wagons, and 4 or 5 buckets, filling them up, pulling them back. Okay, so that's a part of the functional pieces that you have to put back together. And we're putting it back together from this deeper substrate. For example, a substrate of it's now the commons. We're helping each other. And we're not relying on infrastructure that's in person. We're relying on personal relationships and mutual care to satisfy what are still the basic needs. And so it's like a reboot that has to go down to the bottom, and then all the basic things have to be dealt. The ones that have to be dealt with, but in this particular way. And then a world is now built from there. And it actually felt that way. I mean, by the time we were 3 weeks in, this is in some sense just reality. Here's how you eat. Here's how you poop. Here's how you get fresh water. Here's, and this is what you do. Right? But I have to imagine my daughter, who was just about to turn 6 at the time, when you go 2 solid weeks where every day is the same, except Sunday. And in her case, what that meant was after the morning is kind of over, 1 meal a day, more or less, some snacks, but you go to the church and mom and dad sort of get involved in whatever they're doing. And you participate in this whole new kind of feral youth tribe that is doing 1970s kid stuff. By the way, there's a scene, car traffic is almost gone except for big old trucks. There's a scene where I'm sitting there, I can't remember what I'm doing. I was doing I had a shovel. So I was getting ready to go shovel mud at somebody's house. And I look, and she's 5, almost 6. and she goes zipping by on like an electric motorcycle. I just look and I'm like, oh, I guess that's what's happening now. And definitely no, not, I don't think she even had shoes. So we're talking 70s, like we're deep, like 72. Yeah. And so that's that notion of there's actually sort of a proper order of the worlds, and that we actually live in the heartbeat of the deepest world, but we ultimately land ourselves or occupy our attention with the most superficial elements. And it's only when something happens that kicks us out of that. And maybe that, yeah, that is the case. That kicks us out of that, that we restore ourselves back closer towards that center. And maybe this is, by the way, now that I'm thinking about it, this is just coming to me real time. This is what the notion of sacraments is about. That the sacraments are these moments that are woven into the nature of reality that allow us to, not in a non-catastrophic way, achieve the day of the Lord.
Right.
Yeah.
And at least, Protestants, sacraments go beyond the two official. I'll say that as a Protestant, because the world is in itself sacramental. But the Protestant churches elevate two, and the two are, interestingly enough, flood and bloodshed. Those are the two sacraments. And I always try to, in the Christian Reformed Church, baptism is biblically the washing away of our sin, but I always found that overly domesticated, when biblically baptism is a water ordeal. It is, and which is exactly what your community underwent. Your community underwent an ordeal of wind and water. And the sacraments, as we practice them in the church, are ceremonial. They are ceremonial sacraments of the day of the Lord. And we are all, we begin our life in a sack of water. And in many ways, birth is sort of a baptism, because we come out of the water and we gasp, air for the first time. And of course, when I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, most of the people that I worked with were former Baptists, and so they were not going to have anything about this sprinkling. And when we would, at least in the area of the country that I went to, the missionaries, it was interesting watching the missionaries wrestle with this in different ways, depending on the missionary. But the place of the country that I went to, where many of the Haitians were freshest from the other world, they would line up to go into the water, and they were usually dressed in white. And then the preacher would take them and put them under, and in many cases, they would start to convulse, because this is an exorcism ordeal. And then the pastor would grab them again and put them under again. And as long as they were convulsing, the pastor would grab them, and you've got to drown the devil out of this person. And then finally the person would just lie in repose, and then the pastor would gather them and bring them back to the world. And I remember some missionaries wouldn't tolerate this, and they would wade into the water and make the pastor or the people stop. It's cut out this nonsense. Other missionaries were sort of, no, don't intervene too quickly. Watch and learn, try to figure out what's happening. And I remember the president of the national church coming out to our region once. And of course, when someone as exalted as the president of the national church comes, you save up your baptisms and you do them when he's there. And I remember the president watching this and saying, our baptisms in the Capitol don't look like this. And but again, it's revelation, it's apocalypse. Well, one of the things that occurs to me too is, now we've had, I regularly avoid political conversation, but the safest time to talk about politics, and the best time to talk about politics, is after an apocalyptic event. And it strikes me that in 2016, I mean, I remembered Aaron Sorkin's letter to his daughter after Donald Trump was first elected. And basically, the heart of the letter, he's saying, we were unable to stop this, but we're not going to let this happen again. And of course, in 2024, it happens again. And if if you receive two revelations, you should probably give it even more thought than just the one-off you received. And so, when I think about part of what the apocalyptic nature of a natural disaster is, it's so interesting how in our culture, like the Walking Dead is apocalyptic. It's dystopian, but it's also apocalyptic genre. And especially in our culture, we sort of picked up the dual nature of apocalypse, I think because of the Apocalypse of John, the last book in the Bible, where it's always the day of the Lord is always this revelation, and it is simultaneously a day of loss and trauma and judgment and devastation and death, as well as a day of rebirth and life and opportunity. And part of what happens, I think, especially in our world, where we are now a few centuries into the nation state, because the nation state today is a very different thing. When we look back on maps and we see words like France or Saxony, the lowlands, I mean, so part of what happens then instinctively through the organs of communication is, okay, where is FEMA? And I remember how Katrina in some ways undid the Bush administration. And, for a while that it's sort of you're the disaster that will live with you for the rest of your life one way or another, has sort of passed from the national scene and was, subsumed by other ones. Reflect on me and then you mention, what is a church then? A church is a signal, and it's something around which everyone gathers. I still have that today sometimes when someone will come and they, Goodwill was closed, and it's, very inconvenient to leave the donatable items from either their move or their housekeeping. So they drive into the church parking lot knowing absolutely nothing of the church and dump their load in the parking lot and say, "Oh, you're the pastor, here, give this to someone," and out they go. It's like, well, you didn't want to throw it in the garbage. And so now you've basically offloaded your Goodwill trip to me or your garbage trip to me. Thanks, buddy. But again, you've now lived through something. And so again, I'd love to hear your reflections on the Trump election, the rise of the nation state. Identity used to be Christian more than American or French or Spanish. Those were, these national identities are Johnny-come-latelys.
Well, and they're pretty much over. So the nation state is, can I say just over? It depends on how you'd like to think about that.
Yeah.
The classic, what was the phrase Nietzsche said? Like, Buddha was dead 300 years, but they still showed his shadow in the cave. Something like that. Like there was the nation state is dead, but has not yet fallen all the way. And so there's momentum and inertia that's still embodied in what is a dead edifice. And the question of what is in fact alive, I think, is one of the more interesting questions, let's put it that way. And increasingly present, And by the way, I would say that there are in many ways, 2024 and 2016 are the same.
Yep.
And in many ways, they are completely different.
Yep.
And so one of the things that happened in 2024 that was important is that it was quite clearly now an unfolding of something that was much larger than a given individual.
Yeah.
In other words, ostensibly Trump was elected,
Yep.
but at least 7 people were involved in that thing in a way that caused other people to orient towards it, of which
Yep.
Elon Musk, of course, is a critical exponent.
Yeah.
And that's important, right? Because
Yep.
what that means is that we're looking at something that is an unfolding that is happening at a higher and more subtle level than sort of merely a cult of what's that called? Charisma? Cult of personality. And this wasn't a Reagan era event. This was something else. And of course, from my point of view, it happens to be, or doesn't happen to be, it is part of this larger unfolding where, for example, the nation state is gone. Okay, let's see. Let me just focus in on just a little bit on FEMA, because it's helpful, I think, because it points at something that is difficult. It's important to ultimately grasp. The same thing's true of COVID.
Yep.
So, I don't fault FEMA. So first of all, FEMA did not show up in any meaningful way for a long time, and maybe kind of still hasn't. But
at least in terms of the imaginary, because
exactly
the imaginary of FEMA is vital to the imaginary of the nation state.
Right. So there's no guys in FEMA jackets bringing food and water. There's no sort of trucks with houses bringing any housing. I am reasonably confident, although I have no idea, that there were maybe significant checks being written by some accountant employed by FEMA to pay for the amazing deluge or flotilla of big vehicles that were driving down from all over the place. Many of them probably weren't pure volunteer, although a lot of them were. But the ones who weren't pure volunteer were getting paid, and they probably weren't just getting paid by, philanthropy. Okay, so as a check writing organization that's deploying financial resources to sort of vetted structures that don't carry the name FEMA explicitly, quite likely, and let's say almost certainly. And definitely there's more FEMA stuff going on, almost all of it in the domain of the legal and the financial, meaning people are filling out paperwork to try to get some amount of FEMA funding to rebuild their house, rebuild their business, fill in the blank. Or, by the way, sell their land. FEMA will just buy the land and remove it from the marketplace and just turn it into dead land because flooding is just going to happen there.
Yep.
Okay, so what that means is, so the imaginary of FEMA, the key thing is that FEMA could never have done the thing that was projected upon it, because
Yep.
that's not what a bureaucratic institution can do. It's outside of the scope of what is possible under any circumstances by a bureaucratic institution, because bureaucratic institutions, like the visual image is, you think, like it's 8-bit, it's coarse grained. It can maybe carry, it could pound, like it can write a $1 billion check. It could do that. And it could kind of hit, and it can apportion that through a tremendous amount of paperwork into capillaries that ultimately reach people. But the idea of getting a human being to carry water up the hill to Michelle's house, that ain't gonna happen.
Yep.
And that's not even, it doesn't make any sense that it would happen, because I had a hard time getting permission from Michelle to carry water up to her house because I wasn't her kin, right?
That's
I didn't
right.
know her. She's like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" I'm like, "Well," and she's like, literally, she asked, "Are you FEMA?" I'm like, "No, ma'am. I work at I go to the church down in Swananoa Christian." She's like, "All right, well, come on up, and then we'll sit for a while and talk for a while until we have a real sense of who we are and what's happening, and maybe you can get this tree off of my car." Right?
That's right.
That's just not even vaguely in the scope of what a bureaucracy is capable of ever doing.
Yeah.
By the way, bureaucracies are also not the proper instrument to deal with something like COVID.
Yeah.
So this is not just the nation. So you got the nation state as a design space, and then you get a series of implementations of the nation state. You've got the British Victorian version of the nation state. You then have the collapse of that in the face of a variety of different changes, which gives rise to the post-war administrative bureaucratic state. Okay, and we're kind of like we've reached the end of that, and there's this question of, do we kind of implement the Chinese technocratic top-down AI state, right? That kind of thing, which is not going to be a nation state anymore, but it'll be a state-like function using technology to do the things that states maybe can do. FYI, bad idea, but that may be something people try to do. And the point being, of course, is that none of them by nature can operate in the domain of relationship, right? They are impersonal by nature. And the human beings who live in them are oftentimes strictly prohibited from operating in the domain of relationship. I mean, you saw the example of the fact that it was actually policy to not go to houses that had Trump flags.
Wow.
And the reason it was policy was because that was categorized as probably too dangerous, hostile territory. In the same category as houses that have really big dogs behind the fence.
Right.
It's like, hey,
right.
I'm an administrator. I've got a bunch of people who are doing
Right.
stuff. I need to make sure that my people don't get bit by dogs or shot by wackos. So I'm just going to apply a rule, and that rule is going to just is coarse grained.
It's how you get opted out of the postal service. If the postman
yes, that's right,
believes that your dog is dangerous, suddenly you get a note from the post office that says you can come to the post office to pick up your mail. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because that notion of intimacy is not part of the structure. The structure is anti-intimate, and everything that is necessarily served by intimacy is therefore completely not served by this kind of a institution, and everything that is best served by intimacy is necessarily poorly served by this kind of institution. Okay, so then what happens is we're entering into a moment, and I experienced this first person. Like, we might say that a big part of the transition of this world was moving into the reality that relationships and intimacy are capable of meeting human needs in a particularly profound way. And I mean, I'll just give a simple example. By day 4, people are like, we don't have any food. And by the way, in most cases now, we're also troubled by the fact you can't wash your dishes, which means you're piling up dirty dishes, and post-hurricane, it's all humid and it's all nasty. It's like, this is no good. What are we going to do?
Right.
So the natural answer, all right, we're all going to congregate. Let's all go to one place and we'll have family dinner together. And that's just what you do. And then 5 or 6 people, you're getting water out of the pool. Some people are filtering it, boiling it for washing dishes. Other people are beginning to cook food, and that serves 40 or 50 people, which now becomes a completely different sensibility. You begin to realize why breaking bread together in large groups makes a lot of sense. And that was about 4 or 5 days where we did that, because that's just the context that we had before the food truck showed up and church became the place that we did that. So let's see. Yeah. So part of what we're exiting is the superficial reality where we had given up the sacred, given up the commons, given up the domain where relationalities of the nature and of the essence, into the world of the market and the world of the state, which have capabilities. There's things that they can do, but they are impersonal in nature and anti-intimate in nature. And both of those modes are failing in an accelerating fashion. And one of the biggest opportunities, and again, I say like by necessity, is that we have found a way to, how do you say it? We're either going to enter into the day of the Lord the easy way or the hard way. Let's put it that way. And do so. To enter in the easy way would be a really great idea.
Yeah.
And then let's rest in the fact that the meaning crisis is resolved in the domain of intimacy, in the domain of relationship.
All right. This is why I make clips, because it takes some endurance to listen to a long section like that. And Jordan isn't the easiest guy to listen to follow. He's got very long trains of thought. And why was this important? Why was this important? Now, just at the end there, you notice, so one of the things that Mark Lefevre has mentioned again and again and again and again has been the intimacy crisis. And I think Mark is right about that the meaning crisis and the intimacy crisis are deeply connected, because intimacy is about love and be loved, see and be seen. Now, one of the things that I did in the, I was just saying that this is where I get into the question of the church, and also in the Vesper Stamper video, because I prompted the conversation with Jordan Hall, and very quickly, do you remember that movie that was out? It was Don't Look Up, because basically the nuclear missiles were launched, and the idea was don't look up because they're going to come down and destroy. And everybody knew that they had a half an hour. And how did they use that half hour? The people with any kind of humanity or wisdom at all use that half hour with their loved ones. Why? Now this is such a common assumption in our culture, and our culture still holds this idea and holds this value. Why is the Thanksgiving after a presidential election so fraught? It's because we're with our supposed intimates. Why are family gatherings so fraught? Something has happened to intimacy. Something, and what has happened to intimacy is not disconnected from politics. It's not disconnected from banality. It's not disconnected from the superficial world, where the John Hears and Jordan Hall conversation come together is later in this conversation. I might have clipped it already for the channel. I don't know. Later in this conversation, what Jordan Hall is going to point out is that with the hurricane, there's an acute catastrophe. And suddenly, Verizon is off, the cell phones are off, the power is off, the water is off. Jordan Hall wakes up in the middle of the night, and what does he think about? The lists of people he loves, those that he has an assurance of intimacy with, and he probably prays for them, and he's concerned about them, and those that are within this little island of reachability, he is going to try to pursue. Okay? Now, we migrate to the most superficial level. So slowly but slowly, services are restored. What does that mean? The roads are repaired. He said just 2 or 3 days ago, the water came on, electricity was restored, and internet was put back on, and suddenly, well, we're back in our devices. And we're back in the mundane, and we're back in the superficial. And the point that Jordan makes a little bit later is we start to die. We start to die. It's this tiny age of decay, day by day death that is sapping our lives. Instead of a hurricane or a flood or a fire or an earthquake or a car wreck or a terminal fast onset disease or one of these things that suddenly creates a crisis, and we reach out for our loved ones, and a million tiny slights and offenses are forgiven and overlooked for the sake of the urgency that we just want to be loved and to know that we are loved. We, in the meaning crisis, embrace the death every day, but in tiny, tiny increments. And the reason sacraments matter are sacraments go the other way for us, because sacrament suddenly says, hey, wait a minute, those kids that you're ignoring, in a few years, they are going to be gone, and they're not going to want to spend any time with you, especially if you keep treating them the way you're treating them. Maybe you should get rid of these little things that are tearing us apart and start figuring out how to mend lives. And so what happens in a catastrophe is we're thrown together, because I can't flush my toilet without my neighbor's pool. I've got 10 pounds of rice, but I've got nothing to eat with it. And my friend has a freezer where he bought half a cow, and it's all going to go bad. So we're going to have to, all of that meat is defrosting. So we're going to have to cook all of that meat right away. So I've got rice. They've got a cow that's going to have to be, why do you kill the fattened calf? And why do you call the entire neighborhood when you kill the fattened calf? Because you don't have refrigeration. And so And so where this connects with the John Hears conversation is John comes to me and says, what is happening with the church? Because he was Episcopalian and is now Orthodox. And he was attracted to Orthodox because of submission. And he tells this great story. I clipped the story. Tells this great story where he's newly married, and very soon after the marriage, his wife gets pregnant. And of course, the further the pregnancy goes, the less comfortable intimacy with his wife is. And then the baby's coming. And so he sort of marks out, okay, the baby will be here. And then mama's got to rest before. I mean, he's thinking of it just completely selfishly as a man with sexual needs, and he wants to be a Christian. And so he's like, when will I have access to sex again from my wife? And then he does the math and he realizes that right when he's hoping to be reunited with his wife intimately and sexually, that they're going to be entering Lent. And he's going to have 52 days where, with his newfound religion, he should not avail himself of intimacy with his wife. So he goes to his priest and he lays this out. And then the priest says, well, then have sex with your wife. And he's like, what do you want me to tell you? And he's like, well, and the priest says, you want me to give you a blessing or a dispensation? And no, I mean, if you're going to have sex with your wife, have sex with your wife. But you don't understand the fasting. And so what that sets up for him is an understanding of fasting and feasting. And one of the things that I think the traditional religions, to the degree that they're practiced, this discipline of fasting and feasting trains us for the apocalypse, just like the sacraments train us for the apocalypse. Because I remember watching, there was a spinoff of The Walking Dead where somebody's realizing that the zombie apocalypse is happening and the virus is out there. And this guy decides he wants to look for a drug addict. So what do you mean you want to look for a drug addict? I think it was a little off base, but his idea was, a drug addict has a certain sharpened perception. I've dropped the link. Y'all can come in and talk if you want to. The drug addict has a certain sharpened perception that has a certain focus. Now, I think it was a helpful thing to look at. But what the feasting and fasting is intended to do is to bring into our lives little apocalypse. Now, David Dark wrote Everyday Apocalypse a number of years ago. I should probably reread that book. I remember talking to an evangelical megachurch pastor, and we were having a group of pastors getting together, and we're talking about church stuff. And when pastors get together, it's sort of like moms getting together, because we talk about our churches and we talk about our frustrations and we talk about all this stuff. And the subject came up in this pastors group. What would it take to have a truly widespread going back to church in the country? And the pastor said, a continual natural disaster. Tim Keller's church plant was just kind of a small, not a mega church or anything. It was a church plant in New York City, and then 9/11 happened, and suddenly he had thousands showing up. It's not an accident that it was during the Cold War that American church attendance reached its peak. That is peak church attendance in American history, not the 19th century, not the 18th century. Yeah, it's it's not, and this is where modernistic thinking will fail you. Because if you think, oh, a disaster will just kind of make people into Christians, no, it won't. Some people it will ruin. What you begin to learn, and we know this, and this is part of a lot of the conversation around children and adults. You see this all the time when people talk about their children, and it came up recently in the Jordan Peterson Glenn Laurie conversation. And in the Jordan Peterson Jonathan Peugeot conversation, what do people want? Whoops, you have to mute. You got to mute me. Trying to bring you in here. What do people want as a parent? They want no disasters in their children's life. They want every toy. They want to please their children and give them every toy. And they want to have nothing but, they want them to marry the right person. They want that marriage to go great. They want them to have a great job and make a lot of money. And so parents sacrifice and strive and do all of that for their kids so they'll have the best education. The parents privilege their kids at their own sacrifice as much as they can. That's what the good parent does. But then you get to a point when you realize as a human being, I would not have any of the spiritual wisdom or maturity or self-discipline, any of the things that when I have to say, what is it that makes me a competent, capable, self-sacrificing, good person in the midst of community? It's almost always the tragedies in my life. And so what you need for a good human being, and everybody's mix is different, is the right mix of blessing and tragedy. And that's what makes a saint. And often it sort of scales up where, and the Apostle Paul talks about this, where the Apostle Paul is, there's speculation as to when the Apostle Paul went into heaven. Some people think it was when he was being stoned. But the Apostle Paul says, the thorn in my flesh is because of the surpassing revelations. In other words, the more God wants to use you, the more he will afflict you and the more he will bless you, because those afflictions and those blessings keep scaling up. And that's exactly what you read when you read the lives of the saints. And we are now in a place where we've had basically 7 decades of fat cows.
Right.
And we're entering a time when I think we're going to have decades of lean cows. And I think that's why, and we're also hitting this 500-year inflection where a bunch of the stuff has run its course. And just like it was at the beginning of the modern period, where you had the witch scares, you had the levitations and Carlos Air, you had all of these things. Now we're coming into a new time. And as Peugeot keeps saying, it's going to get really, really weird and or probably bloody. We're sort of set for more wars. And wars are endemic. They're always with us. But, we've got the anxiety about Ukraine and Russia. We've got the anxiety about the Chinese. And, we don't know what wars will look like next. But we've been living under the
big nap.
Yeah. We've been living under the fear. I think it was like Stories of Old, or it was Thomas, was it Thomas Flight, the movie guy? One of them had a really good video about movies since the Second World War, movies since Hiroshima, because it's reoriented our fears. I don't know. I've talked too much. Go ahead, Cal.
Yeah, no, I mean, you were the quotation that immediately popped into my head was the tag from A Good Man Is Hard to Find. When the misfit who is just assassinated, really a family, looks to his buddy and says she would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. And there's a real insight, again, macabre and gothic and all that nice stuff, right? That you associate with Flannery O'Connor, but there's a real insight into this strange tension in which virtue only seems afforded when there's something at stake. And there's there's a reason why you have these grand old traditions of fasting and asceticism. And I think that we even those of us who come from traditions who have not in theory jettisoned those practices, we've all jettisoned those practices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so so it's not terribly surprising that we're not very good right now. Because we're just so damn fat and satisfied.
Yeah.
And so I'm not surprised, frankly, sort of this that little on a Mac, you got that little sort of spinning beach ball of death. I mean, I think it just kind of, I think we all sort of sense that, it's just spinning, and it's perilous or something.
Yeah. In my conversation with, there's so many parts in that conversation, and there's plenty of pushback in the comments. A lot of people have their take on Jordan Hall. For me, this conversation was really helpful in terms of bringing a lot of things together for me on this point of fasting and feasting.
Just sort of conceptually, just sort of where are you going with that?
Well, exactly the point that you just made, that we all sort of have fat man's disease, and most of us are fat too.
Well, right, yeah, literally, and physically, I should say. But isn't there this sense that our churches, right? And I don't want to get you in trouble, but our churches are fat, in that same kind of way. And if you look at what being fat does to the functioning of the body, I think it can start to make a little sense about why we have lost function. Now, my question to you about that is that what would it look like for the church, scaled out, largely understood, to suddenly become fit again? Would my concern about that, Paul, is that it would render the kind of mere Christianity that all of us traffic in here much more perilous, because I think in some respects the reason why we can do what we do here in TLC is because our churches are such a hot, flabby mess that they don't even know what we're doing.
That's true.
Sorry.
It's true. I see, and this is where, again, later in the conversation, I got into this with Vesper Stamper too.
I listened to that.
That, so we've got this big system over the cold Pacific Ocean. Mm-hmm. It's not a hurricane out here. It's not like what happens, you get the category 5s over the warm air of the Gulf, because warm air and cold air can hold different quantities of moisture.
Right.
And so what happens is that this dispensation can only hold so much. And so, and I think in order to understand, because so then you say something like, okay, when the church gets lean, and it usually comes with a harrowing, where sort of churches get the nominals get put out, it gets wrung out. This is what happens to the church under communism. This is what happens to the church under Nazism. This is what happens to the church in these places. Now, the church shines, but I would argue that different seasons provoke different fruits. Mm-hmm. And so there's an irony, again, back to my trip to Italy this summer. Mm-hmm. We are touring the fruits of a church that was corrupt, fat, all of the maladies we have. Mm-hmm. And that's what provoked and produced these brilliant cathedrals, which are have a certain kind of glory in them. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's a glory to fat years and there's a glory to lean years. And God uses both in this dispensation to accomplish his glory.
Well, and you might even, we could get really nerdy and into the weeds on that, but you think of some of these small towns who built these cathedrals, it didn't necessarily come out of the fatness. I mean, I know that for instance, St. Peter's is, the new St. Peter's, the one everybody we now see and know, that, comes, plays a pivotal role in the Reformations. And, but, you look at those cathedrals, that, maybe 200 years before that, let's say, those didn't necessarily come out of largesse as
Right.
such. So that's I don't know. I
But,
wonder
but
if
all
the
of
Baroque,
but
as
all
the
of those
Baroque,
but all of those cathedrals. So if you go to these cathedrals in Italy, you first go there, and now they have these cathedral museums, which are fascinating, and they show this was the first church.
yeah, right,
And then there's a second church,
right.
and they're literally built on the tombs of the saints.
That's
because now you can go underneath. Now, what I want to talk to you, Cale, about is back to the relics thing.
Yeah.
Because, for example, the same church in Rome that has Michelangelo's Moses,
Yep.
which was part of a big, was going to be a tomb for one of the popes, has the chains of Peter.
Right.
And what's interesting about these reliquaries is that you have, on one hand, what are the chains of Peter about? They're about the one upon whom the church will be built. Is there anything uglier than his chains?
Yeah.
And so what the church does around them is set them in gold.
Yeah.
And so you have this, you have this apocalyptic quality of blood and glory, which is very cruciform, right there in this practice. And it was so interesting to me. So I stood there because I didn't know anything about the chains of Peter, because I'm ignorant of all this stuff. I walk in, I see this huge number of people just snapping pictures of Michelangelo's Moses. And yeah, it's a really cool thing. And then you go down into this little thing, and here are the chains of Peter, and nobody's paying any attention. I thought, this is interesting.
I've been to that church, so I know. I mean, I was 20, but I've been there back in the day. Well, I mean, what did you make of it? I can give you my kind of, bigger take, I suppose. But everybody's looking at the statue because, ooh, cool, look, and I'm pretty sure it's a Bernini, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, it's a Michelangelo. Sorry, it's a Michelangelo statue. All right, but like the church is not named after the statue. The church is named after these, and they're like manacles. They're like the actual manacles of St. Peter. Well, again, so as and now a veteran speaker here in this little corner, I mean, what do you make out of it? If you had to put your sort of Vervaeke and your Peugeot hats on, what would you make of it?
The church preserves for itself the apocalypse in dosable quantities for its people to prepare them for the day of the Lord.
Right. So what my sense, my experience as a young American, thoroughly suburban kid going to Rome at 20 years of age, right, and seeing, every church, every major church, a ton of the sub churches, and going on art and architecture tours with a kind of a, my professor was a believer, right? And he was, and not only was he a believer in all the kind of the standard kind of Orthodox Catholic ways, but he was like a believer in Rome. Like he was all in. And so, the crazier or the weirder the story, the better. I mean, he relished scandalizing all of us American Catholics with his, and he's a Canadian guy, but an North American guy. He relished as often as possible to tell us the strangest, craziest stories. Crazy and strange, I'm putting in modernist scare quotes. And so it was an utter shock and a total unmaking of my world when I went to Rome at 20, with all of my classmates. And I remember that church. And of course, you go in and you see the statue, and it's beautiful, right? And we had to, when we would go in, we would have to take notes on things because we would have art and architecture tests, once a week or whatever it was. So I wasn't a tourist, strictly speaking. I was a sort of a student pilgrim. That was kind of the mode that we were in. And so you look at and I remember the story about the horns, which is a kind of reading of the Vulgate, which suggests that the horns were really the light beams that were coming out of his bright face. But the medievals and the Renaissance people interpreted it as like actual horns. It's where you see a lot of those old statues, with I think it's Moses, and I think maybe certain statues of St. Paul have it, but Moses, it's kind of the stock image of Moses in Rome. Anyway, and so you see that and like, okay, cool. And you're looking at it and it's amazing. You're like, how do you make this? And then you go on and like, if memory serves, it's like a little thing right below it or right to the side of it, maybe right behind it, are these manacles. And so my professor gives me sort of the full, rundown, that these were the chains of St. Peter, and we know the stories and whatnot. And of course, what did you think my first reaction was as this is 1992 or 3,
You were
whatever it was.
skeptical.
Totally. Like, what?
Yeah.
Come on. Really?
I was
These are
more
really
skeptical of the pieces of the manger, frankly, but
right.
I totally get it.
Right. And so I was right there, and I remember looking with my buddies and my friends, and we're like, really? Like, okay. Anyway, so but I have to say, after a certain time, you see all these different things, and you're there long enough, and you start to kind of, man, you just keep hearing these stories, and you're in these buildings, and you're like, man, at some point, some sophisticated person, because that's the thing, right? You're always tempted to think that you're necessarily more sophisticated than some Joe from 1463, right? Because you can work a remote control.
Because we have gadgets that you and I didn't even make.
That's right. And so that is such a huge part of the way our that's such a battery that charges and feeds our skepticism, right? But anyway, you're there long enough, you're like, there's a lot going on here. And anyway, so as I have thought about it over the years, I am left to conclude that there is intention behind intention, not intention of, but there's intentionality in all of these things. And my sophistication is not derived from being born in 1973. That my sophistication is probably no different, minus the Toyota Camry that I drove to school in, versus some very sophisticated guy in the 14th or 15th century. Right? That's like sort of a number one thing you have to kind of break down. So then, okay, well, what is sophisticated bro doing? Like, why waste all that money? Right? Why waste all these resources on a fairy tale? Right? And I can, and I really beg people to genuinely ask themselves that question. I think it's such an important question. That especially in a time where resources are not sufficiently flush. It's like, so anyway, poverty is chronic and need is chronic. And so anyway, they set aside all these resources to preserve these wrought iron things, right? You look at them, and so like, why do you spend so much time, so much effort, to sort of preserve these things? And so my what I come up with now is that there is a need to radically reassert for every generation memory. There's a need to radically reassert the thisness of the incarnation, the fact, we might say, of the incarnation. And so how do we remember facts? It's like, well, why does my wife keep her wedding dress? Why do we keep an album of pictures when nobody looks at albums of pictures anymore? Why do we keep these items and these artifacts? Well, it's a sort of a do this in memory of me kind of thing. And it seems to me that the one thing that we're always almost about to give up is the incarnation. Is exactly what Tolkien, blows Lewis away with on Addison's Walk. It's that this is the myth that became real. And so, so this is part of the reason why I am always obsessed with this question of the real. And Vervaeke in the class that he did with Symbolic World, was talking just a lot of like what is real, and this is why there's sort of these arguments about convergence, and how do I load up all these things? You talked about, you were calling it a stairway to heaven. I prefer sort of Peterson's ladder. I think I like that a little bit better than Peterson's Stairway to Heaven, because I'm not so sure heaven's the right thing. He's trying to do something a little bit different. Plus, I like the idea of Jacob's ladder, and I think he even invokes Jacob's ladder.
Yeah, he does invoke
in
Jacob's
that
ladder.
So part of what Jordan's
Jacob's ladder comes down from above.
Right. Eminent versus emergent, right? And so, I think that the preservation, say, of the chains of Saint Peter is that, look, these are real people with real histories and real artifacts. It's like when you go to the Smithsonian Museum, and I'm sure I know you've been there. One of the things you go, like, that's the Enola Gay, right? Like the one, that, and it's like it feels sacred. Like that is, I remember going to the Cultural Museum when I was a kid, and like that was Archie Bunker's chair, which is really kind of funny, right? Because it was a show that we watched as a family, and I remember looking at the chair, and I remember they had Indiana Jones's leather jacket and hat and whip, behind glass. It was like, that's like the real one, all that kind of stuff, right? So I think what it's doing here is it is preserving. I mean, like, ultimately, to sort of get all Catholic on you, it's a preservation of the apostolic succession. I think that's really what it comes down to. And this makes all of us a little bit uncomfortable, but we can all do this in our own sort of way. Is that the hands that poured water over you, Paul, in your baptism, had other hands behind it and behind it and behind it, and it goes all the way back. Right, all the way back to an actual time and an actual place, and so much of this comes down to, and this guy Peter, right? This guy Peter was a real guy, and he is witnessing to Jesus. Yes, of course, right? That's the real deal. But so much of this is about verifying. Is this thing real? And so I can imagine, the Roman who decided to build this church and to preserve this and honor it with a statue from Michelangelo, of all things. It's like, I want the generations that come after me to understand that this is real.
No, I agree.
And so we can scoff at that, but it's deeply human. This goes back to the same thing that Peterson always talks about with Elvis's guitar.
Right. Obviously, well. Then I go to the great church of Milan, which is wow, what a building.
Yeah.
But there's also, in the competition between these cities, in these churches, there's also a huge amount of just plain human avarice and carnality.
Sure.
Being built, because we need to somehow build the church in Milan is, Florence is beautiful.
Yeah, it's
and all of this. And then I just read Ryan Burge posted a thing on this big survey that was done in all of nations about religiosity, which is, okay, what on earth do we mean by that word? And people trying to talk about how religious they are. And so then they ask follow-up questions. Like, one of the questions is, do you believe in life after death? Italy.
Right.
Was near the bottom.
Yeah.
Italy and Spain. And I don't remember, but and then suddenly you get these weird realities in history. For example, Wittenberg, before sort of the revelation of the Star of Wittenberg, that was Luther, who of course sort of broke the thing.
Yeah.
The Prince of Wittenberg had collected about, one of the best collections of relics in the Holy Roman Empire.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it's like, and this is where the apocalyptic is so weird. And it's always the kind of thing that we can't get our mind around. And again, part of part of what was going on in the hive mind this morning in the live chat. What I'm T. Grog says something about what a stupid God to design people like this. Okay. As if we have any idea how to design people, much less raise them. But the thing that I began to realize as what Jordan Hall sort of forced me into thinking about is, in fact, how we deal with revelation, given what we've learned from Vervaeke and Peterson in terms of cognitive science. Again, the interesting thing about this current religious movement, it is in fact being provoked by science, because science is the one that is telling us at the end of this conversation, I can't really tell you everything that Cale said to me, even though I'm sitting here listening to all of it and participating. My mind is constantly filtering through a value structure everything that Cale is saying to me, that which is salient, and up and up and up I go. And so when I think about the intensification of revelation that happens in something like a natural disaster, I can begin to understand why it's, when God tells Moses, I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock, only my back, and I will announce my name, otherwise you will die. It's basically God saying to us, little people, you can just take a little bit. It's like when my parents, when I was young, my father would have to cut the meat up for me and into small little bites. So, my little mouth could chew it and swallow it and not choke.
Yeah.
And I think this is what happens with apocalyptic, and why even, it's sort of like, I was watching this Denzel Washington drug movie recently where he was complaining that all the drugs that they were buying for their guys on the street, they were all cut already. Well, the reason you have to cut the drugs is because your customers are going to OD.
Yeah.
So you cut the drugs to keep them alive, to keep them buying.
To slow it down. Yeah, exactly.
Slow it down. And part of what, where Jordan and I went in this conversation, he was able to make me see how what we have done in our culture with our cell phones, with our distractions, with our luxuries, with our fatness, is we have basically cut the drugs so thin. Now our life expectancy is way long, but we're dying every day in our tiny little meaning crisis. And one of the telltale signs is alienation between parents and children, alienation between husbands and wives.
That's good.
Mark, you're next.
Okay. Been really enjoying your content last couple of days. Really amazing. Good, really good stuff.
Thank you. At least I haven't lost you yet. A lot of people are upset.
Are they really?
Oh yeah. There's people. The thing about YouTube is you'll always hear the complaints, because comment sections were made for complaining.
That's right.
So.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm curious. What are the complaints about? It's not wasn't my original question.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Jordan Hall can be kind of hard to take.
Really?
Well, he gets very meta.
He does, but I find since his conversion, particularly when he's talking to guys like you, he's super clear.
I had the same experience.
I couldn't understand a word he said before, but now it's like he's so often like crystal. I'm like going, wow, the Lord's really working through him in some amazing ways. Anyway, I'm struggling to feel the whole apocalypse thing. I mean, I know my liberal friends are in a state of mind. And I'm seeing a lot of apocalyptic talk among people who seem to have voted the other way too. But it's just, I'm not feeling it. But it's just like, what do you do? I keep going back to what do I go back to do? Okay, say it's the end of things, and it's just Micah 6:8. And nothing changes. It's all the same. Right. It's just, I have a little less money in my pocket, maybe. But then if what Jordan was describing, his experience comes, I mean, it was what did he say? 500 times you have this experience of the of like the intervention of God moving through the experience. These coincidences that aren't coincidences, providences, events that he spoke about, providential experiences during the worst of the catastrophe. And he said, you start at first. It seems like we're getting some background somewhere.
Yeah, it was Samuel just was doing it, so I just muted him.
It just seems like, are we really even going to lack? I mean, because he just said you kept coming in. Somebody, you need something, and you need something from somebody, and next thing you know, you're talking, and then walks somebody through the door, and they've got exactly what you need to deal with the problem in the moment. And he said it's a coincidence at first, but when it happens, he said, I think he used the number 500 or something like that. He used some huge number, but when it happens again and again and again, you start to see the hand of God.
Yeah. Well, and I think,
so what are we worried about?
I think, Mark, for you, let's look at your story. Mm-hmm. You've been wrestling with bipolar for
I've been
years.
in the apocalypse my whole life.
Exactly. And just recently you were attacked by a dog. You've been living in the apocalypse your whole life. And so for you, this stuff is like, what are people upset about? So,
yeah.
So yeah, I'm not worried about you.
Thanks, Paul. Good to see you, Kale. I have the good stuff, Kale.
Corner citizen man, what say you? Oh, Samuel, we're getting feedback and delay through you. I don't know why. So go ahead.
Just wanted to say what's up. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Isaac.
I like the title got me a little bit. If there's anything interesting, I'll let you know where my brain goes. But
okay,
good on you guys,
Isaac.
Thank you.
All right.
Go ahead,
is that better?
Oh yeah, I don't. Well, I hear it when other people talk, so it sounds better now. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Alan, I want to get Alan in here first.
Okay.
Because he was next.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in I was listening to PVKU and Kale talk, and it's just funny right now. I started a new job, and I've been very busy, and it feels very much just the time, the time slips away. You log into work at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., then you try and go to Bible study, have to leave by 8:30, I sometimes have to leave before it ends, and then you go to bed. And maybe that's not apocalyptic, but it feels very like, well, it's only going to get more stuff is going to get jammed in here, and it's going to get harder and harder there are fewer and fewer degrees of freedom. So the things that you do have on the boat matter more and more. And it comes a point where you can't just add more things to the boat. You got to move got to take something off the boat to put something on. So, what you've loaded up into your mind, into your algorithm, you want to call it, into your patterns of being, and all that stuff seems to matter more and more. And it's, I can already feel what it'd be like to just wake up and 10 years have passed, because, then I have a wife, and then I have kids, and comedy took a backseat, or this, I just couldn't do this, or I didn't have time for this, and I was so busy. And just, that's sort of an apocalypse of its own, in terms of like, it's an unveiling of like, okay, that was your life. Those were the decisions you made. Those are the things you left on the boat, and those are the things you took off the boat. Yeah. So, I mean, you can't have Mark's attitude of, it's going to be okay, but also, you're going to see the fruits of the seeds that you planted. Yeah. And it becomes more real the more stuff happens. And I guess, the events you're talking about are, hurricanes and earthquakes are, more stuff than ever happening in one moment, but that can even happen in a subtle way of just, more responsibilities, new job, kids, wife, all that. So the coming to fruition of all the things that you've chosen, and how you deal with that.
Yeah, I mentioned, last night I was just like, oh, I got so much to do, but I remember when I didn't have so much to do. There are blessings in both seasons. So, Samuel, what say you? You're first. I don't know if you're first time in here. I don't.
No, I've been in here once before, but I think I had a beard and long hair instead of a
Okay.
mustache. I don't know if any of you guys hearing that story that Jordan relayed really made me think of the book Tribe. I don't know if any of you
I
guys have
haven't
read
it, but I've
but
heard a lot of good
I
things
mean,
about it.
it's really good, and it's only like 80 pages or something. You can burn right through it, but it's all about similar situations and how people really become more alive in them, and like people with all sorts of mental illness, depression type issues, just like going away because they're in a city under siege where everyone's starving to death. But it was really interesting. There was one of the cases in his study. This might have been in Aleppo, but I remember it was a deal where there was somebody who got evacuated because she was in poor health, and they worked on her at a hospital in Germany, and then she's trying to get back in. And it was a common situation where people were trying to get back into these seemingly horrible situations because they couldn't imagine being anywhere else.
Yeah, it's the through line on the underneath the Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, really? I've never thought about that. I suppose that's why Brooks explains that. Yeah. It's interesting too, when you said whichever pastor was talking about, if you wanted a real religious revival, you'd need a continuous natural disaster. And gosh, it's like, oh, that's what Exodus is that whole time in the desert is just a continuous ongoing natural disaster that they're stuck in. And it's like, who can take it and who can't.
Yeah.
Not
A majority of
a little too individualistic, maybe. But,
Yep.
anyway, those were the only thoughts I had listening
All right.
to this.
Thanks, Samuel. Isaac Spirit Man.
So I lost it. He sparked something in my brain. It had to do with we've kind of cut off our mind from God in this world as like a whole. So we live in the 3 dimensions. We live like based on the flesh and the ego and the evolution, and that's like the real shift. I see that our consciousness has been broken from its pure state. That's what he sparked.
All right.
We had a pure state, and it was, I don't know. I believe sin is separation from God in the mind, but you can't really separate yourself from God. He's always with us. So like it's like a personal thing. You're separating your mind, and that's what we're seeing: survival of the fittest, or smartest, or intellectual, or it's called egoism, where you take advantage of someone else based on you profiting. It's kind of what capitalism turned into, corporate lobbyists, all that. But it's coming to that point where make or break. I think this, and I believe in like the frequencies and the torus field of the heart. The torus field is created by the heart. The heart is talked about in the Bible all the time as being this like powerful compass, this source of like understanding beyond, not in the mind. So like you have compassion and empathy, and I believe that Earth's energy field can actually be affected by the mass people on Earth, depending on the percent of people vibrating at that dimension would alter the Earth or make it earthquake or whatever. Like when Jesus died, it released so much energy, like the Earth shook. Like that's crazy. So I see that if we could harmonize our conscience instead of pass this new law or this new bill or whatever, like that's where we're gonna get any ground. I think is a conscious mind effort, like change, and not just like the new law or something, or like you know what I mean.
Okay. It's Michael Sartori, and then Nechama. I just take them in order that you swing into the room.
Well, I had a personal family apocalypse yesterday. My wife found out my father-in-law's got prostate cancer.
Oh.
And the it's testimony of just how powerful these things are. So, for my wife is pretty upset about it because she's already lost her mother. Her mother died before we got married, right before we started dating. But that apocalypse was kind of, was the catalyst that kind of got us together. And it was also what brought her father back to the faith. He had kind of gone, lukewarm or whatever, and they had divorced. And then when she passed, it brought him back in. And yesterday, we were talking on the phone, and he said, and you could hear it in his voice. He said, "You know what? As soon as I found out, I was actually excited because God is going to be glorified through this." And that is his prayer, that God would be glorified through this situation. And I think, that's just the most powerful thing. And for my wife's sake, I'm asking people pray that he would be glorified in the very mundane, early, treatable, kind of ways that provide. We don't want. He's kind of thinking like some big dramatic things might happen. We don't want that. We want the straightforward look at what modern medicine has done, which I believe God inspires that whole progress. But just to see, like, even when I first met him 10 12 years ago, whatever, like, that would not have been the way that he would have handled that. And so it's just it's just, there is something to the way that these tragic things, and these, especially when you get the opportunity to look at the apocalypse without and surviving, like, what a blessing that is, that you do get to reorientate your life.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've never met a saint that hasn't been through at least one serious apocalypse in their life. It seems to always be there. So, Nechama, good to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you. Thank you. I saw you were online. I had to pop in.
Oh,
yeah, I think I don't know, maybe a few months since we talked. 2 months probably. Give or take. So yeah, I thought it'd be a nice opportunity. I don't know specifically how to talk to this conversation. Not that it's not relevant, not that I don't have what to contribute, but
well, you're sort of in northern Israel. You've sort of been living in a ongoing, every now and then, acute apocalyptic. I mean, rockets fired and wars, and I mean, that's not a small thing.
Yeah. Sort of most mornings, it's like sort of a shock to wake up. Like, I wake up and I go, oh, I'm awake, and then depending on how many times I woke up in the middle of the night is how tired I am or how achy, or so it is very acutely present. I don't quite know what to make of it. To be honest, I've been having a really difficult time integrating my life in a sort of cohesive way, like I did in the past. It's very different. I was talking to my brother yesterday, and I compared it to, like, living in a household where the parents are fighting and the dad's hitting the mom and the mom's yelling at him, and it's sort of what it feels like, as an environment, being on a war front. And then you have these really delicious moments of peace and quiet. Like, I had a morning the other day, and there weren't any rockets till 2 p.m. And I was like, oh, this is so nice. How luxurious, So, yeah, it's a strange situation. And I mean, one thing that I was thinking about, what you were talking about, apocalypse and narrative and things like this. This is all my opinion and belief, but I think we're a narrative species, and we narrate ourselves as individuals. We narrate our groups and our environments, And like you said, we have that salience landscape, so we notice, oh, hi, look, Paul, there's a green tree. Oh, look at that giant sycamore, and I've noticed that specifically for one reason, and Isaac didn't for another reason. And that's actually one, just tangentially, salience landscapes for individuals should be different, ideally. They are customized to each of us, to our spirits, to our nervous system, to our environment. So when people talk about content and consuming content, and I need to see it all, it's like, no. You got to learn how to trust your salience landscape and what pops out to you, what's relevant to you. And that will guide you. It may not make sense all the time. So I sort of think of, I may have mentioned this before, I don't know, I sort of think of algorithms as artificial salience landscapers. And that could be positive, negative, or neutral. I'm not going to put I've definitely put judgments on that, and I'm so, and actually one thing I did at the beginning of the war is I went on Twitter, and I'm still on Twitter, and I'm still trying to figure out what to do with that, because it is messing up a little bit with my salience landscape, but at the same time, I can get second-to-second information in my town locally about the missiles, about the rockets, about the drones, and be able to, and then I've also found some really fascinating people that I wouldn't have connected with otherwise, So for me, I think what I've been struggling with, and I had this feeling in the beginning of October that if I didn't do a live stream in the beginning of October, it wouldn't be till the end of November. So I felt the winds of change, and I was like, I'm not going to want to deal with it. I'm going to want to focus on what's happening here. Oh, what was I just saying a second ago? I lost my train of thought there.
Well, I liked what you said about, the algorithms and salience landscape, because basically every tool we make is an attempt to, let's say, to work our salience landscapes. And if you think of a house as a tool, what does a house do in terms of our salience landscape? Well, now our salience landscape isn't bombarded by rain. It's not bombarded by the changes in the weather. It's not bombarded by the neighborhoods always walking by, the neighbors always walking by. It's not, houses and the kind of houses that we build today are designed to basically create quiet and calm so that we have more agency over that which we want to focus on. It's the same reason when you go into a library, everyone expects you to not talk aloud in a library. And so the algorithms, I think, are basically a continuation of that same thing, where we are continuing to try to work the signal to noise ratio to be better, whatever better is.
Yeah.
So that's, and so then when you talk about using Twitter and the way you're using it, some people go to Twitter because they want to complain about the government. Some people go to Twitter because they want to show what they just bought or talk about their new car. You're going to Twitter because it's actually a tool that you can use to find out certain kinds of things in a locality. And Twitter can do that really well, but you have to sort of, okay, I'm going to follow this, I'm not going to follow that. And then you have to sort of train the algorithm to bring to you what it is you want to like and what you like. And now we have all these algorithms that are trainable, because if you use YouTube long enough, you very quickly realize your algorithm is trainable. Just keep watching what you want to see, and YouTube will keep sending that to you. So,
yeah. If I could add one thing. Hi, Sandy.
Yep.
Long time no see. The one thing that I want to get across, I guess, about algorithms is similar to banks, how they're the mediator between my exchange. If I want to send you money, the bank is the mediator before Bitcoin. After Bitcoin, I could send directly to you, no middleman. So what I personally would love to see going forward is communication that is Bitcoin style, that is not reliant on the YouTube. And it feels very infantilizing to me. I don't, every time I call my mother, somebody is sitting there going, shouldn't Nahama talk to her mother today? Is this a good idea? And for how long? It's like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So,
No,
that's
a great point.
once we can sort of move to a more decentralized model of communication and rely less on these big corporations, which, by the way, I do think it's our collective choice that we're relying on them.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Collectively, subconsciously. Yeah.
Yeah. Or because the truth is, there are many social media platforms. I mean, Nextdoor is a great one. I don't know if you have that where you're at, but Nextdoor in the United States, that's where people go to complain about the barking dog, or the fireworks, the neighbors, because it's all next door. So that social media cuts out a certain way. And so all of these platforms are also operating in a larger ecosystem. So Sandy, you look a little under the weather. Are you sleeping in, or you got a cold, or what's up? Oh, you're muted.
Well,
Oh, no, you're not.
it's Friday. I work. I'm only here when I'm sick. This is the third time I've been here on a Friday. It's been that year.
Oh, boy.
And it's actually my fourth time sick.
Oh, my. That's not nice.
No. Sorry, I'm thinking about Nechama's Bitcoin thing. I heard her say that somewhere else, and I didn't understand. Anyway, it was interesting.
Yeah.
I'm glad you repeated it, because I'm not getting it. But yeah.
Does it make sense now, or can I elaborate on anything?
You could elaborate if you would like. I would just my only contribution was I'm here because I'm sick, and I'm sick because it's the fourth funeral or funeral related thing in the year, and I keep having panic attacks because it's all 40-year-old crap, and I'm very tired of being sick. So I was just going to say, this is that place. But yeah, go for it.
Well, this is where you belong right now. So I'm glad you're here. Yeah. The Bitcoin thing is more so what Bitcoin does is it cuts out the bank. It cuts out the middleman. So you can't have a government who gets mad at you or what you say on the internet and then decide to shut down your bank account. Bitcoin completely, I'm not going to get into the tech of it, but it cuts out that middleman. And so for that reason, it's revolutionary. But the main point is the middleman.
Yeah. And they can filter information. Yeah. Like, so with the media being the middleman, they basically filter our perspective or something. Like, Bitcoin allows free trade. And there was one other thing that sparked. The banks aren't making money anymore to corporatize America.
But you
and they don't like it.
Like, you likened it to this place. Why we're here, talking to Paul, that place where, like, avoiding the middleman. Am I allowed to this? Am I allowed to that? Right.
Right.
And that's
so
my kind of question is, why am I still getting sick? What is this? Because I've got some kind of internal middleman yanking my chain so freaking hard. I'm really tired of getting sick. So I'm kind of like, what you say makes sense, but I don't know why.
Well, you connected getting sick to, a lot of this conversation, we have sort of talked about trauma. And because it seems that we as human beings need to have the right mixture of trauma to do certain things. Exercise is basically controlled, limited trauma in a way that strengthens. And apocalyptic is, and I think, again, when we're talking about, let's say, sacraments in the church, they're supposed to be controlled, limited trauma to strengthen the body. And anybody who's dealing with post-traumatic stress means that there was overwhelming trauma, and that trauma, sort of like a mortgage. You take out a mortgage, you take on all of this debt, and then what that means is that you eat it a little bit at a time. And so you're paying for past trauma, hopefully productively, little bits at a time, but maybe not productively right now.
No, we've talked about that. I paid for debt up front over 100,000. And I wasn't the one working. I was just the one saving.
Yeah.
So I should be paid off. I went through.
I've often I find that the overload hits after the fact, not necessarily during, because during the body has adrenaline to run off of. And also during different moments of crises and grief and all of these things, the body also gives off an excess amount of cortisol, which specifically for women is deadly for the body. Immune diseases, all this stuff. So you have the adrenaline going during the crises, you have the cortisol spiking during the crises. After the fact, all the overload of, and look, I'm not a scientist, but this is my rudimentary understanding. You'll have all that excess cortisol, and the body can finally relax. There's no more adrenaline, and you just collapse. And so, of course, the body's going, I need a rest. I don't feel good. I'm sick now. So it sounds to me like now is sort of like a recovery season. Definitely, I hear the frustration with getting sick over and over again. And with the amount of sort of upheaval and loss that you've had, that's certainly understandable, but I'm definitely not happy to hear about it.
It's super irritating, and I think I'm really mad at myself because, like, seriously, you go through all the hearts, and then you break down at the easy stuff. And honestly, like, I got a kiss from somebody who helped walk me through a whole lot of abuse. The mother-in-law of the young man that died at the most recent funeral. Well, he didn't die there. You know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And 25 plus years rise straight back to the surface. And I can't just go to church, Paul, because I trigger off it. For crying out loud, what am I to do? I don't.
What happens when you trigger? Like, you cry or what?
And I get sick. Yeah, I do cry.
I was saying, I don't know if you worship God a lot. Like,
yeah,
it seems to. Okay, cool. It really does. Like, I don't know, something with the heart frequency. I don't know if I could recommend a few that I know. I don't know. It puts me in a really good place, honestly. Remind me. Just thinking.
I'm in a great weird place. I spent 25 years in Paul's denomination, and I'm now hanging out with Jews, Noahides, and Catholics.
Interesting mix.
I'm non-denominational. I just believe in Yeshua. That's it. I don't follow it.
That Jews and Catholics thing is pretty common. Like a lot of my wife is Jewish, as most people know, and a lot of the other like mixed couples we have, it's like Jewish Catholic marriages. So there's something to that. And I'm Anglo-Catholic, so kind of Catholic adjacent at least. I actually just got I got on to say hi to Paul because I actually had a moment. My work has been crazy lately. I actually had a moment where I could do that, and the title was intriguing. And then the conversation it turned to something that it's something that I'm not ready to talk about yet. I had a cryptic tweet yesterday that was kind of hinting at the direction of my thought, but I don't like Nahama, what you said about Bitcoin is interesting, but I still don't think Bitcoin is the answer, because I actually think that
that's not what I meant. It was more of an analogy.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to be reductive about what you were saying either. It's just that I really think economy is actually more important economy is more important than we think it is in terms of the deepest problems that we face. But I don't mean, when I say economy, I mean it in a philosophical sense.
Productivity.
No, I don't mean productivity. I precisely don't mean productivity. I think that the problem with the economy of the world is that it is inherently transactional. And I think that a lot of the talk about sacrifice is really wrong because of how deeply ingrained our sense of the transactional nature of the inevitable transactional nature of the economy of the world is. And it is, and if we really want to begin to see the possibility of the kingdoms open up to us, then it's going to have to be through conceiving the possibility of an economy of gift. And this is nothing that I've talked about before. I've seen before. I'm somewhat alarmed by how reformed certain aspects of of the line that I'm thinking are. And I might actually do my first ever solo video on this, because there's a lot of complexity and nuance I want to give here. And I do realize that my tweet was kind of extreme, but I actually wanted to draw attention to discussing the issue. So the rhetorical force was intentional. I'm going to nuance what I said at some point in the future. And I really just wanted to say hi to Paul. And I was sorry that we weren't able to make it for you to be on the panel.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, though. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, glad you enjoyed it.
And Julian came out of the gate just, and so much of that was, of course, Julian as a, he's lived this stuff in many ways as a Hutterite. And so
Right.
he knows the limitations of what exactly King's North is pointing to. And I thought Julian phrased it perfectly about you can't, because right now, I think partly because of all of we have so much affluence that there's a deep longing for fasting. And so now you even see that, in the, as Peugeot says, the gym bro space. So now we've got selective fasting, and we've got carnivore diets, which is a weird kind of fasting. And, we've got all of these weird things. And so we've got an instinctive movement towards fasting, but I don't know that we can formulate optimization of it. Just like we can't formulate optimization of the right kind of trauma versus trauma that disables and overwhelms.
Yeah.
So
just that Julian was great to have on that panel. And he really does have, what Julian has to say about these things is, to me, I give a lot more weight than to my own thought, because I have a certain ideological bent and I can talk the talk, but Julian walks the walk and is living in a way that's very much in accordance with the things that I only talk about in principle. So credit to Julian there for that. And his latest, people might want to see his latest blog on his blog, his latest blog entry on his blog, Coffee with Kierkegaard, is kind of his version of what he would have said.
Oh, good.
And I haven't had a chance to read it yet. He just sent me the link. But I actually asked him if he would come on and talk about it before I even read it, because I know, because of what I just said, I know that it's going to be very good and insightful, because it has this real embodied experience of living that way behind it.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
all right.
That's it. I'll get out of here.
All right. Thanks, Nate. I'm going to shut the stream down at the top of the hour. We're not going 24 hours. My life does not afford me doing 24-hour streams. So last thoughts, people.
Well, I was going to say I'm going to pop off because I wondered if you and Nahama wanted to talk some more, because I liked the conversation that was going with the three of you. But
okay. Well, thank you, Sandy. It's good to see you. I hope you feel better soon.
Me too, but thank you.
All right.
Last thoughts? Well, I just want to say much love, everyone, and praying for you. If you're alone out there and you don't think anyone cares, I do. And praise God. So,
thank you, Isaac.
Good
to see you.
Love
Thanks
everyone.
for jumping in.
Peace.
Any final thoughts, Nahama?
Gosh, that's a hard one, Paul. I think I'd echo something that was that Isaac who just left? Was that his name?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. What he said, which I'm gonna have to paraphrase. There's something along the lines of, well, it's not that God is not there, or that we're all separate. It's just an illusion. It's just we've forgotten. So I would just say the original design is there. I think it's just a matter of uncovering it and finding it. And that's sort of for the individual and for the collective. So that seems to be the present challenge. And it's interesting times, because we're all sort of like clay that just woke up and we're like, oh, we could mold. Oh, How? In what way? Like, or so yeah. It's a pleasure to see you. I'm glad
Well, it's
I
good to see
got
you
to
too.
say hi today.
All right. Well, thanks for jumping in.
Pleasure. Talk soon.
All right. Okay. We're gonna end this little stream with about Chad's poem. I think it's a good way.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. The ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. A hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad, daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. Always on the brink of somewhere. Each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river. Dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us. Baptized in ball pits. A clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please. Say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers, see what I say, just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. I think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host, who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
Where are you here?
Oh, there I am. Hey.
Where are you? Where?
Got me?
Oh boy. Yeah. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Come on, man.
Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All that long is Jesus' journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Yeah.
Walk with my mama.
You walk with my mama.
Walk with me.
Walk with me too.
You walk with my mama.
Yeah.
Walk with me.
And walk with me. me to. Yeah. Jesus journey. Want Jesus. Walk with me. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. All along this Jesus journey. Hold my hand, Lord, and hold my hand. Walk with me. You walk with Moses.
Walk with me.
Walk with me.
You walk with Moses. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
While I'm home.
Yeah.
Jesus
journey.
I want Jesus.
I want Jesus to walk with me.
Say, walk with me, Lord. How y'all doing? Walk with
me.
Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
I'm on my I want Jesus.
I want Jesus
to walk with me.
To walk with me. Walk with David, a little shepherd boy. Yeah, you made him a great king. I know David shouted for joy. He walked with David, and he's a little shepherd boy. You made him a great king. And David shouted for joy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. You gotta walk with me, Lord.
Yeah! That was rocking great, brother.
Oh, yeah.